Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The Texas Panhandle stretched out flat and dark under a sky so thick with stars it looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Zebediah Kincannon had been driving these roads for 11 years, and he still found something hypnotic about the emptiness. Highway 287 cut through country where towns were 30 miles apart, and the only lights came from oil derricks blinking red in the distance. Most drivers hated this stretch. Too lonely, they said. Too much time alone with your thoughts. Zeb never minded it. He had his CB radio for company, a thermos of coffee that his wife packed every trip, and the steady rhythm of 18 wheels rolling south toward Amarillo. Tonight, he was hauling irrigation equipment from Dumas, standard cargo on a route he could drive with his eyes closed. The kind of run that paid decent and let him get home before his daughter's soccer game on Saturday. It was just past midnight when he saw the portable way station signs. They popped up in his headlights about 2 miles before the checkpoint itself. Those familiar orange diamonds with black lettering that every trucker knows by heart. All commercial vehicles must stop. He eased off the accelerator and started downshifting, letting the engine brake do most of the work. His rig settled into that familiar rumble as he rolled towards the lights. The way station was one of those temporary setups the state used when they were doing enforcement sweeps. A couple of portable buildings, the scale platform itself, and enough floodlights to make the whole area look like a stage. Zeb could see 2 other trucks already pulled over to the side, drivers probably getting their paperwork checked. He rolled onto the scale and waited for the signal. The woman who came out of the office was middle-aged, wearing a high-visibility vest over a state employee jacket. She had a clipboard and that slightly bored expression that way station clerks always seem to develop after a few years on the job. Zeb rolled down his window and handed over his paperwork before she even asked. "Evening," he said. Zeb Kincannon, hauling irrigation equipment to Amarillo. She took the papers and glanced at them, then looked at the digital readout from the scale. Her expression shifted slightly, just enough that Zeb noticed. She looked at the readout again, then back at his paperwork. "Your bill of lading says you're at 42,000 pounds, she said. Scales reading 43.8. Zeb frowned. That was more than a minor discrepancy. That can't be right. I watched them load it myself. Weighed it at the shipper before I left. "Well, the scale doesn't lie," she said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced herself. "Pull over to Bay 3 and we'll have you cross the scale again. Sometimes we get ghost readings when the platform's settling." He nodded and pulled forward, parking where she'd indicated. Through his passenger window he could see the other 2 trucks still sitting there, engines idling. Both drivers were standing outside their cabs, talking to what looked like highway patrol. The conversation looked casual enough, but something about it made Zeb uneasy. He couldn't put his finger on what. The clerk came back after about 5 minutes and waved him forward to the scale again. Zeb pulled back onto the platform and waited while she disappeared into the office. When she emerged, her expression was different. Not quite worried, but definitely puzzled. 44,200, she said. "You gained another 400 pounds. "That's impossible," Zeb said flatly. "The trailer's sealed, has been since I loaded. You can see the bolt seal yourself, numbers right there on the manifest." She checked the seal visually, walking around to the back of his trailer and shining a flashlight on it. When she came back, she was shaking her head. "Seal's intact, number matches. But something's not right here. Let me get the supervisor." Zeb sat in his cab and tried to make sense of it. Weight didn't just appear out of nowhere. The scale could be miscalibrated, but not by that much. And if it was off, it would be consistently off, not showing a different weight each time. He grabbed his phone to call his dispatcher, then noticed he had no signal. That wasn't unusual out here, but the timing felt wrong. The supervisor who came out was a state trooper, tall guy with gray at his temples, and that particular way of walking that said he'd been doing this job for a long time. His name tag read Langford, Eustace Langford, according to the full name embroidered below it. "Mr. Kincannon," he said, pronouncing it carefully, "we seem to have an unusual situation here. I'm going to need you to cross that scale one more time, but I want you to do it slowly. Stop when I signal you." Zeb complied, easing his rig onto the platform at maybe 3 miles per hour. Trooper Langford stood at the scale office window, watching the digital readout. He raised his hand when Zeb's trailer axles were fully on the platform, signaling him to stop. The trooper disappeared into the office. When he came back out, his expression was carefully neutral in that way cops have when they don't want to show that something's bothering them. 44,900, he said. "You're telling me that seal hasn't been broken since loading?" "I watched them put it on myself," Zeb said. "Look, I don't know what's going on with your scale, but my cargo doesn't change weight. It's steel pipe and aluminum fittings, not exactly something that absorbs moisture or settles during transport." Langford nodded slowly. "I believe you. But I've been running this station for 6 years, and I've never seen a scale behave like this. You mind if we take a look inside that trailer?" Under normal circumstances, Zeb would have said no. Opening a sealed trailer meant breaking the seal, which meant paperwork and phone calls and delays. But the way Langford asked wasn't quite a request. And honestly, Zeb wanted to know what was causing the readings as much as anyone. "Go ahead," he said. "But I want the clerk to document everything. Time, seal number, the whole 9 yards." They did it properly, the clerk photographing the seal before Langford cut it with bolt cutters. When they swung open the trailer doors, the cargo was exactly what the manifest said it should be. Sections of aluminum irrigation pipe, neatly stacked and secured with cargo straps. Boxes of fittings and connectors. Nothing that should have gained 700 pounds in the last 20 minutes. Langford climbed up into the trailer with a flashlight, checking the cargo straps and looking behind the front bulkhead. He spent maybe 10 minutes in there before climbing back down. "Everything looks normal," he said, but he was frowning. "Nothing's shifted, nothing's wet, no signs of tampering." "So what now?" Zeb asked. "Now we seal it back up and you cross the scale one more time," Langford said. "If the weight's still climbing, I'm calling the state metrology lab. That scale might need a complete recalibration." They put a new seal on the trailer, the clerk documenting the new number. Zeb pulled onto the scale for what felt like the 10th time that night. The digital readout flickered for a moment, then stabilized. 45,600 pounds. Langford stared at the number for a long moment. Then he looked at the clerk, who shook her head like she couldn't believe what she was seeing either. The trooper walked over to Zeb's window. "Mr. Kincannon, I don't have an explanation for this," he said. "Your cargo checks out, the seal was intact, and there's no logical reason for that number to keep climbing. But I can't let you proceed with an overweight load, especially one that seems to be getting heavier by the minute." "So, what am I supposed to do?" Zeb asked, hearing the frustration creep into his voice. "Sit here until morning." "I'm going to make some calls," Langford said. "See if the state lab can send someone out tonight. In the meantime, you're going to have to park over there with the other trucks." It was only then that Zeb realized the 2 trucks that had been parked when he first arrived were still there. Both drivers were standing outside in the cold, smoking cigarettes and looking just as confused and frustrated as Zeb felt. He pulled over and parked next to them, shutting down his engine but leaving the running lights on. The night stretched out quiet around them. The floodlights from the way station cast harsh shadows across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, Zeb could hear the faint static of CB radio chatter, though he couldn't make out the words. He climbed down from his cab and walked over to the other drivers. One was a younger guy, maybe late 20s, wearing a jacket with the company logo Zeb didn't recognize. The other was older, probably pushing 60, with the kind of weathered face that said he'd been driving truck longer than the young guy had been alive. "Either of you having scale problems?" Zeb asked. The older driver nodded. "Started about an hour ago. My weight kept going up every time I crossed. Trooper made me open my trailer, checked everything, sealed it back up. Weight's still climbing." "Same here," the younger driver said. "I'm hauling auto parts. Stuff doesn't just gain weight sitting still." Zeb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "What's your weight showing now?" "Started at 38,000, the older driver said. "Last time I crossed it was 41.5. Been gaining about 500 pounds every 15 minutes. The young driver pulled out his phone and checked something. "Mine's up to 44,000 from 41. This doesn't make any sense." They stood there in silence for a moment, watching the way station. Trooper Langford was inside the office, visible through the window. He was on the phone, looking at the scale readout and shaking his head. "You notice anything else weird?" the older driver asked. "Besides the scale?" Zeb thought about it. "My phone's got no signal. Could just be the location, but it seems off." "Mine neither," the young driver said. "And my CB's been acting strange. Getting interference on every channel, like someone's running a bad transmitter nearby." The older driver nodded. "Been hearing it too. Almost sounds like someone trying to break through the static. Can't quite make out what they're saying, but it's there." Zeb walked back to his truck and climbed up into the cab. He turned on his CB radio and switched through the channels. Sure enough, on channel 19 there was interference. Not the usual static you got from atmospheric conditions or distant transmitters, but a rhythmic pulse that almost sounded deliberate. He turned up the volume and listened carefully. Behind the static, there was definitely a voice. Or maybe voices, plural. They were speaking too low, or too distorted for him to understand the words. But the cadence suggested conversation. And every so often, something would come through clearly. Numbers. He heard what sounded like a license plate number or maybe a truck identification number. Then more static, then another sequence of numbers. He grabbed his CB handset and keyed the mic. "This is Kincannon on 19. Anyone else hearing this interference?" The response came from the older driver, whose truck was parked right next to his. "Yeah, I'm hearing it. Can't make out what they're saying, but it sounds like they're reading off numbers." "Those aren't random numbers," the young driver chimed in. "That last sequence was a Texas commercial plate format. 7 characters, starts with T." Zeb felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He climbed down from his cab and walked over to where the other 2 drivers were standing. All 3 of them were looking at their CB radios now, listening to the strange transmission that seemed to be getting stronger. The static would pulse and fade, and in those moments of clarity, they could hear fragments of what sounded like a dispatcher giving instructions. Route numbers, mile markers, times, and always those identification numbers, spoken in a flat monotone that sounded almost mechanical. "This is giving me the creeps," the young driver said. "It's like listening to ghost truckers or something." The older driver didn't laugh. "I've been driving these roads for 30 years, he said. "And I've heard stories about things like this. Weird CB transmissions, scale readings that don't make sense, trucks that show up where they shouldn't be." "Stories," Zeb said, trying to keep his voice steady. What kind of stories? The kind people don't like to talk about in daylight, the older driver said. Missing drivers, trucks that vanish off GPS tracking, accidents that happen in places where there shouldn't be accidents. My dispatcher told me about it once, after a few drinks. Said there are parts of these highways where things don't work the way they should. Before Zeb could respond, Trooper Langford emerged from the way station office. He was walking toward them with an expression that Zeb couldn't quite read. Not worried exactly. More like someone who'd just been told something they didn't quite believe but couldn't dismiss either. "Gentlemen," Langford said when he reached them, "I've been on the phone with the state metrology lab. They're saying the scale was calibrated 3 days ago and passed all tests. They're also saying that what you're describing, what I'm seeing on my readout, isn't possible. And yet, here we are," Zeb said. Langford nodded. "And yet here we are. They're sending a technician out, but it's going to be at least 2 hours. In the meantime, I need you all to stay parked. Don't attempt to leave the station. Don't cross the scale again. Just sit tight." "What about the CB interference?" the older driver asked. "You hearing that?" The trooper's expression shifted slightly. What interference? The 3 drivers exchanged glances. Langford hadn't heard it. Or maybe he was hearing it and didn't want to admit it. Either way, something was very wrong here, and it was getting worse. Zeb went back to his truck and sat in the driver's seat listening to the static pulse through his CB radio. The numbers kept coming, clearer now. Truck numbers, license plates, route markers, and something else, something that made his blood run cold. One of the numbers was his own truck identification number. He grabbed the handset. "Anyone else just hear their truck number come over the CB?" There was a pause. Then the older driver's voice came back, tight with tension. "Yeah, mine just came through. What the hell is going on?" The young driver didn't respond. Zeb looked over at his truck and saw him standing outside, staring at something in the distance. Something beyond the lights of the way station, out in the darkness of the Panhandle night. Zeb climbed down and walked over. "What are you looking at?" The young driver pointed. "Out there, on the highway. You see that?" Zeb looked where he was pointing. At first he saw nothing but darkness and the faint glow of distant oil derricks. Then he saw them. Lights. Red marker lights and running lights, the kind every commercial truck has. They were moving slowly down the highway coming from the north. "Convoy," Zeb said. "Probably 3 or 4 trucks. Watch them," the young driver said. "Just watch." Zeb watched. The lights were getting closer, moving at maybe 50 miles per hour. As they approached the way station area, Zeb expected them to slow down and pull in. The portable signs were lit up, impossible to miss, but the convoy didn't slow down. It rolled right past the station at the same steady speed, close enough that Zeb could see the shapes of the trucks themselves. They were older models, not antiques, but definitely not new. The kind of trucks you might have seen on these highways 10 or 15 years ago, before aerodynamics and fuel efficiency became the driving factors in truck design. And they were all the same. Same model, same color, same configuration, like someone had ordered a fleet and painted them all identical. "Those trucks didn't stop," the older driver said. He'd walked over to join them. "They're supposed to stop." "Maybe they didn't see the signs," Zeb offered, but he didn't believe it himself. "They saw them," the older driver said. "They just didn't care, or couldn't stop, or something." Trooper Langford had seen them too. He was standing outside the way station office now, looking at the highway where the lights were disappearing into the distance. He pulled out his radio and said something into it, too quiet for Zeb to hear. Then he walked over to where the 3 drivers were standing. "Did you get a good look at those trucks?" he asked. Older models, Zeb said. Looked like they were all identical, running in tight formation. You see any identification, company names, numbers? The three drivers shook their heads. Langford looked troubled. He was quiet for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. I'm going to level with you, he said, because I think you deserve to know what you're mixed up in here. Those trucks you just saw, they've been reported running this stretch of highway for the last 3 weeks. Always at night, always in the same formation, always heading south. We've tried to stop them twice. Both times they just kept rolling, like they couldn't see us or didn't care. You saying they're running illegal? The young driver asked. I'm saying they might not be running at all, Langford said. State Patrol tracked them on GPS both times. They show up on the highway, run about 40 miles, then vanish. Not like they turn off or stop. They just vanish from tracking. No exits taken, no evidence they ever left the road. They're just gone. Zeb felt something cold settle into his stomach. What are you telling us? I'm telling you that something strange has been happening on this stretch of highway, Langford said. Scale anomalies, CB interference, trucks that show up where they shouldn't be. The state's been trying to figure it out, but so far nobody has any answers that make sense. So, what do we do? The older driver asked. For now, you wait like I said. The technician is coming to check the scale. When they're done, I'll cut you all loose and you can be on your way. But I need you to report anything else unusual you see or hear. Anything at all. Langford walked back toward the office, leaving the three drivers standing in the cold November air. The CB static continued its rhythmic pulse, and somewhere in the distance, Zeb thought he could still see lights moving on the highway, but when he looked directly at them, they disappeared. He checked his watch. It was 1:30 in the morning, and something told him this was going to be a very long night. The technician from the state metrology lab arrived at 3:15 in the morning, driving a white van with official state markings. She was a woman in her 40s, carrying a metal case full of diagnostic equipment and wearing an expression that said she'd been woken up for this. Her name badge read Pearline Harbaugh, and she went straight to work without much conversation. Zeb watched from his cab as she set up her equipment around the scale platform. The other two drivers had retreated to their trucks as well, trying to get some rest while they waited. The CB static continued its rhythmic pulse, and occasionally Zeb would hear those fragments of voice breaking through. More numbers. More route markers. Always that same flat monotone that made his skin crawl. Harbaugh spent about 40 minutes running diagnostics on the scale, checking calibration weights and examining the load cells underneath the platform. Zeb could see her frowning at her laptop screen, shaking her head like the numbers weren't making sense. Finally, she walked over to Trooper Langford's office, and they had a conversation that lasted maybe 10 minutes. Through the window, Zeb could see both of them looking at the laptop, then looking at the scale, then back at the laptop. When Harbaugh came out, she walked directly to Zeb's truck. He rolled down his window. "Mr. Kincannon," she said, "I need you to cross the scale one more time. But this time, I want you to do exactly what I say. Pull forward very slowly until I signal you to stop." Zeb started his engine and eased the truck forward onto the scale platform. Harbaugh stood at the edge with a handheld device, watching both the device and the scale readout visible through the office window. She raised her hand when his drive axles were on the platform. "Stop there," she called. "Now pull forward another 2 feet." He did. She checked her device again, then had him pull forward in small increments until the entire truck and trailer were across the scale. Each time she checked her readings, her frown deepened. When Zeb had cleared the scale completely, she walked over to his window again. "Your truck weighs exactly what it should according to your manifest," she said. 42,000 pounds, give or take 50 pounds for fuel consumption. So, the scale's working right? Zeb asked. The scale's working perfectly, Harbaugh said. That's the problem. When you were sitting still on the platform earlier, the weight was climbing. But now that we're doing controlled passes with my calibrated equipment monitoring everything, the weight is normal. Whatever was causing the anomaly, it's not happening now. That doesn't make any sense, Zeb said. No, it doesn't, Harbaugh agreed. But I can't find anything wrong with the scale. The load cells are calibrated. The electronics are functioning normally, and there's no interference from external sources that I can detect. Whatever you experienced earlier, I can't reproduce it. She walked back to her van and started packing up her equipment. Trooper Langford came over to talk to the three drivers, who'd all gathered outside their trucks now that it looked like they might finally be released. The scale checks out, Langford said. Mrs. Harbaugh can't find anything wrong with it. So, officially, you're all cleared to proceed. But I'm going to ask you to do something for me. If you experience any other unusual phenomena on your route tonight, I want you to report it. Call the State Patrol Dispatch, tell them what you saw, and mention my name. You think something else is going to happen? The older driver asked. Langford was quiet for a moment. I think whatever's going on out here isn't finished yet, and I think you three ended up in the middle of it for a reason. What reason? Zeb asked. If I knew that, I'd probably sleep better, Langford said. Just stay alert and watch out for those trucks we saw earlier. If you see them again, don't try to follow them. Don't try to contact them on CB. Just note the time and location and keep driving. The three drivers exchanged glances. Nobody wanted to say out loud what they were all thinking, which was that this whole situation felt wrong in ways that went beyond malfunctioning equipment or atmospheric interference. Zeb climbed back into his cab and prepared to get back on the road. It was almost 4 a.m. now, and he'd lost nearly 4 hours sitting at this way station. He'd have to push hard to make his delivery window in Amarillo, but at least he was moving again. He keyed his CB to channel 19 and heard the static immediately. It was stronger now, more insistent, and beneath it, that voice was still broadcasting numbers. He pulled onto Highway 287 and headed south, watching his mirrors as the lights of the way station disappeared behind him. The other two trucks pulled out at the same time, the older driver taking the lead about a quarter-mile ahead, the younger driver falling in behind Zeb. They formed an impromptu convoy, none of them wanting to be completely alone on this stretch of highway after what they'd experienced. The road was empty at this hour. Just the three of them rolling through the darkness. The stars were still thick overhead, and the landscape was nothing but black shapes against slightly less black sky. Zeb kept his speed steady at 65, watching his fuel gauge and his mirrors in equal measure. About 20 miles south of the way station, the CB crackled to life with the older driver's voice. "You boys seeing what I'm seeing up ahead?" Zeb looked through his windshield. In the distance, maybe 2 miles ahead, there were lights. Red marker lights and running lights, moving at about the same speed they were. The convoy they'd seen earlier, or one just like it. "I see them," Zeb said into his CB. "Looks like 5 or 6 trucks running together. Same ones that passed the way station," the younger driver added. "Has to be. Can't be that many identical trucks running this route at night." They closed the distance slowly, their convoy of 3 catching up to the convoy ahead. As they got closer, Zeb could make out more details. The trucks were definitely older models, probably 15 or 20 years old. They were running without any company markings that he could see, just plain dark paint that looked black or maybe dark blue in the starlight. All identical, all maintaining exactly the same speed and spacing. "This is making me nervous," the younger driver said over the CB. Should we pass them or hang back? Hang back, the older driver said. Remember what the trooper said. Just observe and report. But they didn't have to make that decision, because the convoy ahead suddenly accelerated. Not gradually, but all at once, like they'd all hit their accelerators at the exact same moment. Within seconds, they'd pulled away, their lights growing distant. "Did you see that?" Zeb said into his CB. They all sped up at exactly the same time. Like they were coordinated, the older driver said. Or like they're all being controlled by the same person. Or like they're not being controlled by people at all, the younger driver added, his voice tight with tension. Zeb didn't like that thought, but he couldn't shake it. The way those trucks had moved, perfectly synchronized, didn't feel like human drivers reacting to road conditions. It felt choreographed, mechanical. He checked his GPS and saw that he was approaching mile marker 234. The convoy ahead was already past mile marker 236, pulling away fast. Then, as he watched his GPS tracking screen, something impossible happened. The convoy disappeared, not like they'd turned off or taken an exit. The GPS tracking simply showed them there one moment and gone the next. Zeb grabbed his CB handset. "Did you see that? On GPS, they just vanished." "I saw it," the older driver confirmed. They were there, then they weren't. No exits, no turnoffs, just gone. "This is exactly what the trooper was talking about," the younger driver said. "They vanish from tracking. How is that even possible?" Zeb's mind was racing through possibilities. GPS interference could cause tracking to drop out, but all three of them would have to lose signal at exactly the same moment. Jamming equipment, maybe, but why would someone go to that trouble just to hide truck movements? Unless they were hauling something that needed to stay completely off the grid. "I'm pulling over," the older driver announced. "Something's not right and I want to check my equipment." Zeb saw the older driver's brake lights come on, and he pulled over onto the shoulder behind him. The younger driver did the same. All three trucks sat there idling on the side of Highway 287, surrounded by empty darkness. The older driver climbed down from his cab and walked back toward Zeb's truck. In his hand, he was carrying something, but Zeb couldn't make out what it was until the older driver got closer. It was a small GPS unit, one of the handheld types that outdoorsmen use. "I keep this as backup," the older driver said. "It's not connected to any network, just pulls satellite signals directly. Look at this." He showed Zeb the screen. The GPS was showing their current location accurately, displaying Highway 287 and the surrounding terrain. But there was something else on the screen. A dotted line that ran parallel to the highway for about 40 miles, starting around mile marker 225 and ending near mile marker 265. "What is that?" Zeb asked. "That's the thing," the older driver said. "This GPS has a feature that shows historical routes, places where it's recorded movement before. I've been driving this highway for years, and I've never seen that dotted line. But it showed up on my screen about 2 hours ago, right around the time we got to the way station." The younger driver had joined them now, and he was looking at the GPS too. "That's not on the normal mapping data. It's like a ghost route or something." "Or something," the older driver agreed. "I think those trucks we've been seeing are running on that route, whatever it is." Zeb felt that cold sensation in his gut again. "You're saying there's another road out there? One that doesn't show up on regular maps?" "I'm saying something's out there," the older driver said. "Whether it's a road or something else, I don't know. But those trucks are following it." They stood there for a moment. Three truckers on the side of a dark highway, trying to make sense of something that defied rational explanation. The CB static continued its pulse from inside Zeb's truck, and he could hear fragments of that voice still broadcasting numbers. "I want to check something," Zeb said. He climbed back into his cab and grabbed his CB handset, switching through channels until he found one that was relatively clear of static. Then he keyed the mic. "This is Kincannon calling any southbound traffic on 287. Anyone out there hearing me?" Silence. He tried again on a different channel. Still nothing. The highway felt completely empty except for the three of them. Then, on channel 19, a voice came through. Not the flat monotone they'd been hearing in the static, but an actual human voice, male, older, with a Texas accent. "This is southbound on 287, the voice said. "Go ahead, Kincannon." Zeb felt a surge of relief at hearing another driver. "Where you at, driver?" "We're parked around mile marker 234 and we haven't seen any other traffic in the last hour." There was a pause. "I'm showing mile marker 241 on my GPS. Should be passing you any minute now." The three drivers looked north, watching for headlights. Nothing. The highway was completely empty in both directions. "We don't see you," Zeb said into the CB. "You sure you're on 287? "Been on it since Dumas," the voice responded. "Running south toward Amarillo. You boys having equipment trouble?" "Something like that," Zeb said. "You seeing any other trucks? Maybe a convoy of 5 or 6 running together?" Another pause, longer this time. "Negative on the convoy. Haven't seen another commercial vehicle in about 40 miles. You sure you're on 287? Zeb felt his mouth go dry. "Yeah, I'm sure. We're all looking at our GPS right now. Mile marker 234, Highway 287, Texas." "That's where I am too," the voice said. "But I'm telling you, I don't see anyone. Just empty highway." The older driver grabbed the CB handset from Zeb. "Driver, this is urgent. What's your truck number? Give me your company name and unit identification." The voice on the CB didn't respond immediately. When it came back, there was something different about it. Something that made the hairs on Zeb's neck stand up. "Unit T7482X, running for Panhandle Express. And boys, I got to tell you, this is strange. My CB's been picking up interference all night. Voices in the static, reading off numbers. You hearing that too?" That was Zeb's truck identification number. T7482X, his unit, his company. But he wasn't talking on the CB. Someone else was using his ID. The older driver's face had gone pale. "That's his truck number," he said, pointing at Zeb. "That voice just gave your truck number." Zeb grabbed the handset. "Who is this? How do you know my unit number?" The voice on the CB didn't answer directly. Instead, it said something that made Zeb's blood run cold. "I'm where you're going to be. Mile marker 241. You'll pass me in about 6 minutes if you get back on the road. But driver, here's some advice. When you get to the way station around marker 258, don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Just keep rolling and don't look back." "We already passed a way station," Zeb said. "Back at marker 212. There's no station at 258. "There is tonight," the voice said. "And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens to drivers who stop there." The CB went silent except for static. Zeb tried calling back, switching through channels, but got no response. The three drivers stood there in the cold November air, each of them processing what they'd just heard. "That can't be right," the younger driver said. "There's no way station at mile marker 258. I've driven this route 100 times. "Let me check," the older driver said. He pulled out his phone and opened a trucking app that showed way station locations. He scrolled through the listings for Highway 287, then looked up with a troubled expression. "There's no permanent way station at 258, but there could be a portable one, like the one we just left." The voice said, "Don't stop," Zeb said. Why would someone warn us not to stop at a way station? Because maybe it's not really a way station, the older driver said quietly. Maybe it's something else, something that looks like a way station. They let that thought hang in the air for a moment. Zeb's mind was working through possibilities, each one more disturbing than the last. Cargo thieves setting up fake way stations to stop trucks. That happened sometimes, though usually on more remote roads. But the voice on the CB had known his truck number, had known they were coming. How was that possible unless someone was monitoring them? "I say we call the state patrol," the younger driver said. "Tell them what we just heard. Let them check out mile marker 258 before we get there." Zeb pulled out his phone, but he still had no signal. Neither did the other two drivers. They were in a dead zone, common enough in the Panhandle, but the timing felt deliberate. "We need to make a decision," the older driver said. "We're about 25 miles from marker 258. We can sit here and wait for daylight, or we can get back on the road and see what's ahead." "I need to make my delivery," Zeb said. "I'm already 4 hours behind schedule. If I wait until daylight, I'll miss my window completely." "Same here," the younger driver said. "But I'm not rolling into some kind of trap either." The older driver thought for a moment. "Here's what we do. We stay together, all 3 trucks running convoy. We approach marker 258 slowly, and if we see anything that looks wrong, anything at all, we don't stop. We blow right past it, and we call the state patrol as soon as we get phone signal back." It was a reasonable plan, as reasonable as anything could be given the circumstances. The 3 drivers climbed back into their cabs and pulled onto the highway, running in tight formation. The older driver took the lead, Zeb in the middle, younger driver bringing up the rear. Mile marker 235 passed, then 236. Zeb kept waiting to see the convoy of dark trucks ahead, but the highway remained empty. His GPS was working normally now, showing no ghost routes or anomalies, just the straight line of Highway 287 cutting through the Panhandle darkness. At mile marker 240, the CB crackled to life again. This time it was the flat, monotone voice they'd heard in the static earlier. But now it was perfectly clear. No interference at all. "Southbound convoy approaching marker 245. 3 units. Recommend diversion to secondary route." "Who is this?" Zeb said into his CB. "What secondary route?" "Marker 258 compromised. Primary inspection protocol active. All units divert to secondary route at marker 245. Zeb looked at his GPS. There was no exit at mile marker 245, just empty highway stretching ahead into darkness. But as they approached marker 245, he saw something that made him slow down instinctively. There were lights off to the right, about a quarter mile from the highway. Not the lights of a town or a truck stop, but a cluster of lights that looked like they could be coming from vehicles. Lots of vehicles. "You seeing that?" the older driver asked over the CB. "I see it," Zeb confirmed. "What is that?" "That's where the ghost route goes," the older driver said. "Look at your GPS, that dotted line I showed you earlier. It branches off right here." Zeb checked his GPS. The older driver was right. The strange dotted line that showed on the backup GPS split away from Highway 287 at mile marker 245, heading east into empty country. "We're not following it," the younger driver said, and there was fear in his voice now. "Whatever's out there, we're not going." "Agreed," Zeb said. "We stick to the highway." But as they passed mile marker 245, Zeb couldn't help looking toward those distant lights. And in that moment, he saw them, the convoy of dark trucks, 5 or 6 of them, moving across the landscape parallel to the highway. They weren't on any road that he could see, just moving through the open country like they were following an invisible path. The CB erupted with static, and through it came voices. Multiple voices now, all talking over each other. Some were giving route instructions, others were reading off truck numbers and cargo manifests. And beneath it all was a sound that Zeb couldn't quite identify. Something mechanical and rhythmic that made his teeth ache. "Something's wrong," the older driver said over the CB. "My truck's pulling to the right. I'm losing steering." "Same here," the younger driver said. "It's like something's dragging me off the road." Zeb felt it too. His steering wheel was trying to turn right, pulling toward that cluster of lights in the distance. He gripped the wheel harder, fighting to keep the truck on the highway. But the pull was getting stronger, like an invisible force was trying to drag them off the pavement. "Fight it," Zeb said into the CB. "Don't let go of the wheel." "I'm trying," the younger driver said, his voice strained. "But it's strong. It's really strong." Zeb's truck was drifting across the fog line now, the right side tires touching the shoulder. He cranked the wheel left and punched the accelerator, trying to power through whatever force was pulling at them. His engine roared and the truck lurched back onto the pavement. Behind him, he could see the younger driver's truck fishtailing as it fought the same invisible pull. The trailer was swinging wide, threatening to jackknife. The older driver had pulled ahead, his truck weaving but staying mostly on the road. Then, as suddenly as it started, the pulling stopped. All three trucks straightened out, running normally again. Zeb checked his mirrors and saw mile marker 246 pass. They'd made it through whatever that was. "Everyone okay?" the older driver asked over the CB. "I'm okay," Zeb said, his heart still pounding. "That was close." "Too close," the younger driver agreed. "What the hell was that?" Nobody had an answer. Zeb looked at his GPS and saw that they were 12 miles from marker 258. 12 miles from whatever warning the voice on the CB had tried to give them. And somewhere in the darkness behind them, those lights were still visible, still clustered in the place where the ghost route led. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and Zeb had the distinct feeling that the night was far from over. Mile marker 250 passed in silence. The three trucks maintained their convoy formation, none of the drivers willing to break radio silence after what they'd just experienced. Zeb kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes moving constantly between the road ahead, his mirrors, and his GPS display. The landscape around them was unchanged, just the same flat darkness of the Panhandle stretching endlessly in all directions. But something had shifted. Zeb could feel it in his gut, that instinct you develop after years of driving truck. The way the air felt different through the vents, the way the darkness seemed thicker somehow. He'd driven through this stretch 100 times, and it had never felt like this. Never felt like the highway itself was watching them. At mile marker 252, the older driver broke the silence. "My fuel gauge just dropped a quarter tank. That's not possible. I filled up in Dumas before we started." Zeb checked his own gauge. He'd had 3/4 of a tank when they left the way station. Now it was reading just over half. "Mine too. Lost about 1/8 of a tank in the last 10 minutes. "Same here," the younger driver confirmed. "Either we all sprung leaks at the same time or something's wrong with our gauges. Or we've been driving longer than we think," the older driver said. "Check your clocks." Zeb looked at his dashboard clock. It read 4:37. He pulled out his phone to compare, but the screen was dead, despite showing a full battery before. He tried his watch instead. 4:52. 15 minutes difference between his truck clock and his wristwatch. "My clocks don't match," Zeb said into the CB. "Dashboard says 4:37, watch says 4:52. Dashboard says 4:39. the older driver reported. My watch says 5:01. We're losing time somewhere. The younger driver's voice came back tight with barely controlled panic. Guys, my odometer. Look at your odometers. Zeb checked. When he'd left the way station at mile marker 212, his trip odometer had read 3,847 miles. Now it read 3,891. He'd driven 44 miles. But according to the highway markers they'd passed, they were at mile marker 252. That was only 40 miles from the way station. I'm showing 4 extra miles, Zeb said. Miles that don't exist on the highway. 6 extra for me, the older driver said. Where did we drive those miles? Nobody wanted to answer that question. The implication was too disturbing. They'd somehow driven miles that didn't correspond to any actual distance on Highway 287, miles that existed somewhere else, on some other road that shouldn't be there. Ahead, in the darkness, Zeb saw lights. Not the distant cluster they'd seen at mile marker 245, but lights directly on the highway. Bright floodlights, the kind used at construction sites or inspection stations, the kind used at way stations. That's it, the younger driver said. Mile marker 258, the station that voice warned us about. As they got closer, Zeb could make out more details. It looked exactly like the portable way station they'd stopped at earlier. Same type of buildings, same configuration of lights and scale platform. Even the signs looked identical. All commercial vehicles must stop. What do we do? The younger driver asked. The older driver's voice was steady but grim. We blow past it, like we agreed. Don't slow down, don't stop, don't even look at it too hard. Just keep rolling. Zeb's speedometer read 65. He kept his foot steady on the accelerator as the way station approached. In his peripheral vision, he could see figures moving around the buildings, people wearing what looked like high-visibility vests. Everything appeared normal, just like a regular DOT operation. Except for one thing. The scale platform itself was glowing. Not reflecting the floodlights, but actually glowing with a faint greenish light that seemed to come from within the metal itself. And as they got closer, Zeb could see that the figures moving around weren't quite moving right. Their movements were too smooth, too synchronized, like puppets being controlled by the same strings. Don't look at them, the older driver said sharply. Eyes on the road. Just drive. The lead truck, the older driver's rig, passed the way station without slowing. Zeb followed, his heart hammering as he rolled past the entrance ramp. In his mirror, he could see the figures turn to watch them pass, their movements perfectly synchronized. All of them turned at exactly the same moment, their heads tracking the trucks with mechanical precision. The younger driver came through last, and Zeb heard him gasp over the CB. Did you see their faces? They didn't have faces, just blank skin where faces should be. Keep driving, the older driver commanded. Don't think about it, just drive. But Zeb had seen it too. In that brief moment when the floodlights hit the figures at the right angle, he'd seen what the younger driver was talking about. Smooth expanses of skin with no features, no eyes or mouths or noses. Just blank surfaces that somehow still seemed to be watching them. Behind them, the way station was receding into the distance. But something was wrong. Zeb checked his mirrors and saw that the lights weren't fading the way they should. Instead, they were staying bright, maintaining the same intensity even as the distance grew. And the figures were still visible, still turning to watch them, even though they should have been too far away to see clearly. It's following us, the younger driver said, his voice breaking. The lights are following us. Zeb checked his mirror again. The younger driver was right. The glow from the way station was somehow tracking them, staying visible in their mirrors like a spotlight that refused to let them go. And beneath the glow, Zeb could see movement. Vehicles pulling out onto the highway behind them. "We've got company," Zeb said into his CB. "Multiple vehicles coming out of that station. Looks like 5 or 6 trucks." "The convoy," the older driver said. "It's them, the same trucks we've been seeing all night." The dark trucks accelerated hard, closing the distance between them and the 3-truck convoy with impossible speed. Within seconds, they'd cut the gap from half a mile to less than a quarter mile. Zeb could see them clearly now in his mirrors. Same older model trucks, same dark paint, same lack of any identifying marks. "They're coming up fast," the younger driver said. "Really fast, faster than any loaded truck should be able to move." Zeb pushed his accelerator down, feeling his Kenworth surge forward. The older driver and younger driver did the same. All 3 trucks running hard now. 70 miles per hour. 75. 80. Speeds that were dangerous with a full load on a dark highway, but the alternative was worse. The dark trucks matched their speed effortlessly, maintaining that quarter-mile gap. Not gaining, but not falling back either. Just keeping pace, like they were herding the 3 trucks toward something. "Where's the next town?" Zeb asked into his CB. "We need to get somewhere with people, with lights, with police." "Claude is about 15 miles ahead," the older driver said. "Small town, but there's a 24-hour truck stop. If we can make it there, we'll be okay." If we can make it there. The words hung in the air like a curse. Zeb checked his fuel gauge again and felt his stomach drop. Quarter tank. He'd lost another quarter tank in just the last few minutes. At this rate, he'd run dry before they reached Claude. "My fuel's dropping fast," he said into the CB. "Down to a quarter tank already." "Same here," the younger driver confirmed. "Something's draining our fuel. It's like the trucks are burning twice as much as they should." The older driver was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was different. Resigned, almost. "It's not our trucks. It's the road, or whatever we're on. It's pulling energy from us. Fuel, time, distance. Everything's wrong out here." Mile marker 260 flashed past, then 261. The dark trucks behind them maintained their steady pursuit, never gaining, but never falling back. In his rear view, Zeb could still see the glow from the way station, impossibly distant but still visible, like a green star burning in the darkness. The CB crackled with that flat, monotone voice again. "Units in violation of mandatory inspection. Return to checkpoint. Failure to comply will result in escalated response." "Escalated response?" the younger driver said. "What does that mean?" They found out at mile marker 263. The highway ahead began to shimmer, like heat waves rising off pavement in summer. But this was November, and the temperature was in the 40s. The shimmer grew more intense, and through it Zeb could see something forming on the road, something solid taking shape in the middle of the highway. "What is that?" he said into the CB. "It's another way station," the older driver said, his voice hollow. "It's the same one, mile marker 258, but we already passed it." The older driver was right. The portable way station was materializing directly in front of them. Same buildings, same glowing scale platform, same featureless figures moving around it. But they were at mile marker 263, 5 miles past where the station should be. "It can't be the same station," the younger driver protested. "We left it behind. We passed it." "Brake!" the older driver shouted. "Everyone brake now!" All 3 trucks hit their brakes simultaneously, air brakes hissing as they fought to slow down. But the momentum of 80,000 pounds moving at 80 miles per hour doesn't stop quickly. They were going to hit the station, or drive right through it, or something. Zeb gripped the wheel and braced himself for impact. The way station rushed toward him, growing larger in his windshield. He could see every detail now. The portable buildings, the scale platform with its sickly green glow, the figures with their blank faces turning to watch his approach. Then, at the last possible second, the station disappeared. Not gradually, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. One moment it was there, solid and real and terrifying. The next moment there was nothing but empty highway stretching ahead into darkness. Zeb's truck shot through the space where the station had been, his tires finding normal pavement. Behind him, the other two trucks did the same. All three of them rolling through empty air where the station had been seconds before. "What just happened?" the younger driver gasped. "It wasn't real," Zeb said, but he didn't believe his own words. It had felt real, had looked real, but somehow it had vanished like it had never existed. "Or it was real but not solid," the older driver said. "Like a projection, or a memory of a place that used to be here." Mile marker 265. Zeb's fuel gauge was dropping into the red zone now, the warning light glowing on his dashboard. He had maybe 10 miles left before his tanks ran dry. Claude was still 10 miles ahead. They were cutting it dangerously close. Behind them, the dark trucks had closed the gap. They were less than 100 yards back now, close enough that Zeb could see more details. The trucks looked old but pristine, like they'd just rolled off a factory line decades ago. No road dust, no wear marks, no signs of actual use. And in the driver's seats, Zeb could see figures. But like the figures at the way station, they were wrong. Too still, too rigid, sitting at angles that human bodies shouldn't be able to maintain. "They're not people," Zeb said into his CB. "The drivers in those trucks, they're not human." "I know," the older driver said quietly. "I figured that out about 20 miles ago. Whatever's driving those trucks, it's the same thing that was running that way station, the same thing that's been broadcasting on our CB all night." "Then what is it?" the younger driver demanded. "What are we running from?" Nobody had an answer. The question hung in the air as mile marker 266 passed, then 267. Claude should be visible by now, at least the glow of lights on the horizon. But there was nothing ahead except darkness. Zeb checked his GPS. According to the map, Claude was right ahead, less than 5 miles away. But when he looked through his windshield, there was no town. No lights, no buildings, nothing. Just empty highway disappearing into black. "The town's not there," he said into the CB. "GPS says we should be seeing Claude by now, but there's nothing." "It's there," the older driver said. "We're just not seeing it, or we can't see it, like we're on a different layer of reality or something." "That doesn't make sense," the younger driver said. "None of this makes sense," the older driver shot back. "But we're living it anyway. Eyes open, people. We're getting close to something." Mile marker 270. The fuel warning light in Zeb's truck was beeping now, a steady pulse that matched his racing heartbeat. His gauge read 1/16 of a tank, maybe 5 miles left if he was lucky, and still no sign of Claude ahead. The dark trucks behind them suddenly accelerated, closing the final gap in seconds. They pulled alongside the convoy, 2 trucks on each side, boxing them in. Zeb could see the driver of the truck running parallel to him, if driver was the right word. It was a human shape, but wrong in ways that made his eyes hurt to look at directly. Proportions that didn't quite work, movements that were too smooth, an overall wrongness that his brain couldn't quite process. The figure turned its head to look at him. Where its face should have been was that same blank expanse of skin, featureless and terrible. But somehow Zeb knew it was looking at him, studying him, measuring him for something. Then it pointed ahead. Zeb followed the gesture and saw lights finally appearing on the horizon. But they weren't the scattered lights of a small town. They were too organized, too geometric, and they were the same sickly green as the way station's scale platform. "That's not Claude," the older driver said. "That's something else." As they got closer, the lights resolved into a structure. It was enormous, stretching across the entire width of the highway and extending far to either side. It looked like a way station, but scaled up to impossible size. Hundreds of scale platforms, dozens of buildings, and everywhere that green glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Figures moved throughout the complex, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. All of them faceless, all of them moving with that same unnatural synchronization. And at the center of it all was something Zeb's mind refused to fully comprehend. A structure that hurt to look at, that seemed to exist in more dimensions than 3, that pulsed with a light that wasn't quite light. "We can't go in there," the younger driver said, and he was crying now. "We can't. If we go in there, we're never coming out." The dark trucks tightened their formation, forcing the convoy toward the entrance. The steering wheels in all 3 trucks tried to turn right, pulled by that same invisible force they'd felt at mile marker 245. But this time it was stronger, much stronger, almost impossible to resist. Zeb fought the wheel with everything he had, his arms straining, his teeth gritted. Beside him, the faceless figure in the dark truck pointed at the complex again, more insistent this time. And Zeb realized with horror that the figure was trying to help them, trying to guide them not into the complex, but through it. "Follow them," he shouted into the CB. "The dark trucks. They're showing us the way. Trust me." The older driver understood immediately. He stopped fighting the pull and let his truck drift right, following the trajectory the dark trucks were indicating. Zeb and the younger driver did the same, all 3 trucks moving in formation toward the massive complex. But instead of turning into the entrance, the dark trucks veered at the last second, taking them onto a narrow path that ran along the outer edge of the complex. It was barely wide enough for 1 truck, let alone 7 running convoy. The walls of the complex rose on their right, towering structures that glowed with that terrible green light. On their left was nothing but darkness, an emptiness that seemed to go down forever. They threaded through this impossible space, wheels inches from the edge, the dark trucks leading them with precise movements. Zeb could hear scraping as his trailer brushed against the wall, could feel his tires finding the very edge of the path. One wrong move and they'd either crash into the complex or plunge into that bottomless dark. The CB crackled with multiple voices now, all talking at once, all saying the same thing in that flat monotone. "Units in violation. Return to processing. Mandatory inspection required. Units in violation." But the dark trucks ignored them, pressing forward through the narrow path. And slowly, impossibly, the complex began to recede behind them. The green glow faded, the voices on the CB grew fainter, and ahead Zeb could finally see normal lights. The real Claude, the actual town, emerging from the darkness like it had been there all along. The dark trucks accelerated one final time, pulling ahead of the convoy and disappearing into the night. Within seconds they were gone, leaving the 3 trucks rolling alone toward the lights of Claude. Zeb's fuel gauge was reading empty now, his engine starting to sputter. But the truck stop was right there, less than a mile ahead. He could see the familiar logos, the normal lights, the real world coming back into focus. They pulled into the truck stop on fumes, all 3 trucks rolling to a stop at the fuel islands. Zeb shut off his engine and sat there, hands shaking, trying to process what they'd just survived. Through his windshield he could see the other 2 drivers climbing down from their cabs, looking as shattered as he felt. The truck stop was normal. blissfully, wonderfully normal. Other truckers fueling up, a clerk visible through the window, everything exactly as it should be. The parking lot was lit with ordinary sodium lights, not that terrible green glow. The CB was quiet except for normal traffic chatter. Zeb climbed down from his cab and walked toward the other drivers. They met in the space between the fuel pumps, 3 men who'd survived something they couldn't explain. "Did that really happen?" the younger driver asked. "Tell me we didn't just hallucinate all of that." "Check your fuel receipts," the older driver said. "Check your odometers and your clocks. If we hallucinated it, the numbers will match up." They compared notes. Zeb's trip odometer showed he'd driven 67 miles since leaving the way station at mile marker 212, but Claude was 58 miles from there. 9 miles that didn't exist on any map. His truck clock read 5:43, but his watch read 6:18. 35 minutes of lost time. And his fuel consumption showed he'd burned nearly a full tank, covering a distance that should have taken less than 3/4. The numbers didn't lie. Something had happened out there on Highway 287. Something that bent distance and time and reality itself. "The dark trucks saved us," Zeb said. "They let us through." "Why would they do that?" "Maybe they were drivers once," the older driver said quietly. "Maybe they got caught in whatever that was, and now they're trying to help others avoid the same fate. Or maybe there's something else entirely, something we're better off not understanding." They stood there for a moment, watching normal traffic move through the truck stop. Regular people living regular lives, completely unaware of what existed just 50 miles up Highway 287. "We need to report this," the younger driver said. "Call the state patrol, call DOT, call somebody." "And tell them what?" the older driver asked. "That we saw ghost trucks and phantom way stations. That we drove through dimensions. They'll think we're crazy or drunk or worse." "But other drivers could be out there right now," Zeb protested. "Going through what we just went through. We have to warn them." The older driver pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a moment, he said, "Trooper Langford, this is the driver from earlier tonight. Yeah, we made it to Claude, and you need to shut down Highway 287 between mile markers 245 and 270. Right now. I don't care what reason you give, but nobody else should be on that road tonight." He listened for a moment, then hung up. "He's making calls. Whether anyone believes him or not, I don't know. But at least we tried." They filed their fuel receipts and paid for their diesel, each of them taking longer than usual, reluctant to get back on the road. Finally, as dawn started to lighten the eastern sky, they climbed back into their cabs. Zeb sat in his driver's seat and looked at his GPS. His route to Amarillo took him south on 287, the same highway they'd just escaped. But the daylight was coming now, and somehow that made it feel safer. Whatever had been out there in the dark, maybe it couldn't exist in sunlight. He started his engine and pulled out of the truck stop, falling in behind the other 2 trucks. They ran convoy through Claude and back onto Highway 287, heading south as the sun rose over the Panhandle. The highway looked completely normal in daylight. No way stations at mile marker 258 or 263. No sign of the massive complex they'd seen. Just regular pavement and mile markers and the occasional farm truck heading to morning chores. But Zeb kept checking his mirrors anyway, watching for dark trucks that might be following. And he knew that every time he drove this route from now on, he'd remember what lurked beneath the surface of these ordinary roads. The other places that existed parallel to the world everyone else saw. The stations where drivers were processed and measured for purposes he didn't want to understand. He made it to Amarillo without incident, delivered his load on time despite the delays, and headed home to Billings. But that night, and every night after, he found himself waking at 3 or 4 in the morning, remembering the green glow in the faceless figures and the voice on the CB reading off numbers in the dark. The Panhandle highways looked normal in daylight, but Zeb knew better now. He knew what rolled on those roads after midnight, and he knew that some scales didn't measure weight at all. They measured something else entirely, something that had nothing to do with cargo manifests or DOT regulations. And sometimes, late at night when the CB was quiet, he'd hear that flat, monotone voice breaking through the static, still calling out numbers, still reading coordinates, still processing drivers who'd made the mistake of stopping at the wrong station on the wrong stretch of highway. Zeb never stopped at portable way stations after that. Not at night, anyway. And he never drove the Panhandle routes alone if he could help it, because he knew now that the roads had layers, and sometimes you could slip between them without meaning to. And once you did, the only hope was that someone or something would guide you back. The dark trucks had saved them, but who had saved the dark trucks? And how many drivers were still out there, lost between the layers, running roads that didn't exist on any map? Those were questions Zeb didn't want answered. Some mysteries were better left alone, especially when the alternative was understanding them. 3 weeks passed before Zeb drove Highway 287 again. He'd taken every alternate route he could find, added hours to his trips, burned extra fuel, anything to avoid that stretch of Panhandle Highway. But eventually the economics caught up with him. His dispatcher was getting frustrated with the delays, and Zeb was losing money on every run. He couldn't avoid 287 forever. This time, he made sure to start early, planning his route so he'd pass through the problem area in full daylight. No midnight runs, no dark highways, no chance of slipping into whatever layer of reality they'd found that November night. He left Dumas at noon with a load of agricultural equipment bound for Amarillo, the same run he'd been making for years. The highway looked completely normal in the afternoon sun. Traffic was light but steady, a mix of commercial trucks and passenger vehicles moving at normal speeds. The landscape was the same as always, flat and open under a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. Mile markers ticked past without incident. 212, where the first way station had been. Nothing there now but empty roadside. At mile marker 234, where they'd first pulled over and compared notes, Zeb slowed slightly and checked his mirrors out of habit. Just normal traffic behind him. No dark trucks, no convoys running in tight formation. His CB was tuned to channel 19, and all he heard was the usual chatter. Drivers complaining about construction, sharing weather reports, the normal soundtrack of life on the road. Mile marker 245 approached. Zeb found himself tensing, remembering the pull his steering wheel had felt, the way all 3 trucks had been dragged toward those distant lights. But in daylight there was nothing, just a stretch of highway like any other, with scrub brush and fence lines extending to the horizon. He passed 245 without incident. His fuel gauge read exactly what it should. His odometer was tracking properly, and his clocks all matched. Everything was normal, everything was fine, but Zeb couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. At mile marker 250, his CB crackled with static. Just a brief pulse, barely noticeable, but it made Zeb's hands tighten on the wheel. He switched channels, checking 19 through 12, but they were all clear. Normal traffic, normal conversations, nothing unusual. Then, on channel 7, he heard it. That flat, monotone voice, so faint he almost missed it beneath the static. Unit T7482X. Daytime routing detected. Protocol adjustment required. Zeb grabbed his handset. "Who is this? Identify yourself." No response. Just static, and beneath it, that rhythmic pulse he remembered from the night run. He switched back to channel 19 and keyed his mic again. This is Kincannon southbound on 287. Anyone else hearing interference on Channel 7? A woman's voice came back immediately, professional and slightly concerned. This is Pritchard hauling northbound. What kind of interference? Voice in the static, Zeb said. Reading off truck numbers. You hear anything like that? There was a pause. Negative. Channel 7's clear on my end. You might want to have your radio checked, driver. Could be a short in your antenna. Zeb thanked her and signed off. But he knew it wasn't his radio. He'd had the entire CB system checked after the incident 3 weeks ago. New antenna, new coax, new everything. The problem wasn't his equipment. Mile marker 258 appeared ahead. The place where the first Phantom way station had been. The one they'd been warned not to stop at. In daylight, it was just empty shoulder. No buildings, no scale platform, no glowing lights. Zeb passed it doing 65, eyes locked on the road ahead. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, a 806 area code, Texas Panhandle. Against his better judgment, he answered it. Mr. Kincannon? The voice was elderly, male, with a West Texas drawl. This is Wallace Pritchard. I'm a retired state patrol supervisor. Eustace Langford gave me your number. Says you had an unusual experience on 287 about 3 weeks back. Zeb felt his pulse quicken. That's right. You calling to tell me I imagined it? No, sir, Pritchard said. I'm calling to tell you you're not the first, and you won't be the last. Mind if I ask you something? That night you had your trouble. You see any dark trucks? Older models, running in convoy? Yeah, Zeb said carefully. We saw them. They helped us, let us through. Pritchard was quiet for a moment. That's good. That's real good. Means they're still out there, still trying to help folks. I was worried they might have finally gotten caught. Caught by what? Zeb asked. What are those trucks? What's running them? That's complicated, Pritchard said. And most of it I can't prove. But I've been studying this for 30 years, ever since I first encountered it myself back in '93. You mind pulling over somewhere? This is going to take a minute to explain. Zeb saw a rest area coming up at mile marker 263. The place where the second Phantom way station had appeared directly in front of them. In daylight, it was just a standard rest stop, a few concrete picnic tables and a restroom building. He pulled in and parked, leaving his engine running. I'm stopped, he said into the phone. Go ahead. What you experienced that night, Pritchard began. It's been happening on these highways for decades, maybe longer. Nobody knows exactly when it started, but the oldest reports I've found go back to the 50s. Drivers encountering way stations that shouldn't be there. Trucks that appear and disappear. Roads that don't match up with maps. What causes it? Zeb asked. Best I can figure, it's some kind of overlap, Pritchard said. Like there's another version of these highways existing parallel to ours. And sometimes the two versions get too close together. When that happens, things bleed through. The Phantom stations, the dark trucks, all of it. But what's on the other side? Zeb asked. What are those stations for? Pritchard's voice got darker. Processing. That's the word I keep hearing from drivers who've gotten close enough to see. They're processing drivers, measuring them, categorizing them. For what purpose I can't say, but the drivers who actually stop at those stations, who go through the inspection process, they don't come back. Or if they do, they're different. Changed. Zeb felt cold despite the afternoon heat. The dark trucks, you said they're trying to help. What are they? Drivers who got caught, Pritchard said quietly. Long time ago, before anyone knew what was happening. They're stuck in that other layer now, running those routes forever. But some of them, they remember what it was like to be human. They remember wanting to help other drivers, So they guide people through, show them the paths that avoid the processing stations. That's insane, Zeb said. You're telling me there's a parallel highway dimension where trucks are manned by ghosts? I'm telling you what I've learned from 30 years of research, Pritchard said. Hundreds of incident reports, dozens of interviews with drivers who've experienced it. You can believe it or not, that's your choice. But I'm also telling you this. It's getting worse. The overlaps are happening more frequently. More stations appearing, more drivers going missing. Whatever's on the other side, it's getting stronger. Zeb looked out at the rest area, at the normal world continuing around him. A family at a picnic table eating lunch. A couple walking their dog. Everything ordinary and safe and real. Why are you telling me this? He asked. Because you survived, Pritchard said. And because the dark trucks helped you. That means something. Most drivers who encounter them just see them as a threat. Another part of the weirdness. But you understood they were trying to help. That makes you different. Different how? I run a network, Pritchard said. Drivers who've experienced the overlaps and survived. We share information, warn each other about hot spots, try to help new drivers who encounter it. I'd like you to join us. Share what you experienced, help us figure out the patterns. Zeb was quiet for a moment, watching traffic move past on Highway 287. Normal trucks driven by normal people, all of them unaware of what lurked beneath the surface of these roads. What if I just want to forget about it? He asked. Go back to driving my routes and pretend none of this happened. You can try, Pritchard said, but it won't work. Once you've seen it, once you've slipped between the layers, you're marked. It'll find you again. Better to understand what you're dealing with. Zeb made his decision. Okay, I'm in. What do you need from me? For now, just keep detailed records, Pritchard said. Times, locations, anything unusual you experience. And stay in touch with the other two drivers from that night. The three of you experienced it together, which is rare. There might be something important in that pattern. They talked for another 10 minutes, Pritchard giving him contact information for the network and explaining the reporting protocols. When they finally hung up, Zeb sat in his cab for a long time, staring at the highway and thinking about invisible layers and processing stations and drivers trapped forever on roads between worlds. He pulled back onto 287 and continued south. Mile marker 265 passed, then 270. Claude appeared on the horizon, normal and mundane in the afternoon light. Zeb stopped for fuel at the same truck stop where they'd taken refuge that November night, and for just a moment he could see it overlaid with memory. The exhausted terror of that arrival, the relief at finding normal reality again. He completed his delivery in Amarillo without incident and headed home to Billings. But that night, lying in bed next to his wife, he found himself thinking about the dark trucks. Drivers who'd been caught and transformed, now spending eternity trying to save others from the same fate. Had they been good people in life? Bad people trying to atone? Or just ordinary drivers who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, who'd stopped at the wrong way station on a night when the layers got too close? Zeb started keeping the records Pritchard had requested. Every trip, every mile, every moment of strangeness carefully documented. He reconnected with the older driver, whose name turned out to be Marcus Thorne, 63 years old and driving for 35 of them. The younger driver was harder to track down. He'd quit trucking entirely after that night, taken a warehouse job in Dallas where he never had to drive at night. Zeb couldn't blame him. Some people weren't meant to live with this knowledge, this understanding that reality had seams and sometimes you could slip through them into places that operated on different rules. 2 months after the incident, Zeb was driving through eastern New Mexico when he saw them again. The dark trucks, 5 of them running in tight formation on a parallel highway about 2 miles away. He watched them through binoculars, studying their movements. They were heading west, moving at exactly 60 miles per hour, perfectly synchronized. He grabbed his CB and switched to Channel 7, the frequency where he'd heard the interference before. "This is Kincannon. Dark convoy visible 2 miles north of Highway 380, heading west. If you can hear me, thank you, for that night, for showing us the way through." He didn't expect a response, but after a moment his CB crackled with a voice. Not the flat monotone of the processing stations, but something different. Something that might have been human once. "Keep to daylight routes when possible. Overlaps are increasing at mile markers divisible by 13. Warn other drivers. We cannot hold them all back." Then, silence. Zeb looked towards the parallel highway, but the dark trucks had vanished. Not faded into distance, just disappeared like they'd never been there. But the message was clear. The battle between the layers was ongoing, and the dark trucks were fighting it every night. Zeb added the information to his reports for Pritchard's network. Mile markers divisible by 13. It seemed arbitrary until he did the math. Marker 234, where they'd first pulled over. Marker 247, where they'd fought against the pulling force. Marker 260 and 273, both places where they'd experienced anomalies. The pattern held. The network started tracking those markers, warning drivers to avoid stopping at them when possible. It wasn't much, but it was something. A way to fight back against whatever was trying to pull trucks into that other layer. 6 months after the incident, Zeb was hauling through the Panhandle again when he got a call from Marcus Thorne. The older driver's voice was tight with stress. "I'm at that rest stop," Marcus said. "Mile marker 263. And Zeb, they're here, in daylight. The Phantom Station is here." Zeb checked his GPS. He was 40 miles north, could be there in 30 minutes. "Stay in your truck, lock the doors, I'm coming." He pushed his speed up to 75, weaving through traffic. His CB was already on Channel 7, and he could hear the interference building. Not the nighttime intensity, but present nonetheless. That flat, monotone voice reading coordinates and truck numbers. When he reached the rest area, he saw what Marcus had described. The Phantom way station was there, visible in broad daylight, though it looked less solid than it had at night. More translucent, like a projection or a hologram. The scale platform glowed with that sickly green light, and the faceless figures moved around it with their unnatural synchronization. But there was something else. The dark trucks were there too. 5 of them parked in a defensive formation between Marcus's truck and the Phantom Station. And as Zeb watched, more dark trucks appeared, materializing out of nothing until there were a dozen of them creating a barrier. Zeb pulled into the rest area and parked next to Marcus. Through his CB, he could hear the battle of frequencies. The flat monotone trying to call Marcus's truck in for processing, and something else, a different signal, trying to block it. "Unit in compliance required for inspection," the monotone voice insisted. "Approach scale platform. Processing mandatory." But the dark trucks held their position, and after several minutes the Phantom Station began to fade. Not disappearing all at once like before, but gradually losing coherence, like it was giving up and retreating back to whatever layer it had come from. When it was finally gone, the dark trucks remained for a moment longer. One of them, the lead truck in the formation, flashed its lights twice. Then they all vanished simultaneously, leaving Zeb and Marcus alone in a normal rest area on a normal afternoon. Marcus climbed down from his cab, looking shaken but unharmed. "They protected me," he said. "The dark trucks. They showed up the moment that station appeared, like they knew I was in trouble. They're getting more active, Zeb said, fighting back. Maybe we're not as helpless as we thought. They reported the incident to Pritchard, who added it to his growing database of encounters. The pattern was becoming clear. The overlaps were increasing in frequency, but so was the resistance. The dark trucks were multiplying. More drivers from the past joining their ranks, all of them determined to protect the living from the processing stations. A year after his first encounter, Zeb was approached by a woman at a truck stop in Oklahoma. She was in her 50s, wearing a jacket with a faded trucking company logo. She introduced herself as Eola Fenwick, night dispatcher for a regional carrier. "Wallace Pritchard says you're one of the good ones," she said. "Says you've been helping track the overlaps and warn other drivers. I need to talk to you about something I haven't told anyone else." They sat in Zeb's cab, and Eola told him her story. 20 years ago, she'd been a driver herself. She'd encountered a phantom station on Highway 287, the same stretch Zeb had experienced. But she'd made a different choice. She'd stopped. She'd driven onto that glowing scale platform and let them process her. "I should have been trapped," she said. "Should have ended up like those drivers in the dark trucks, running forever between the layers. But something went wrong with their processing, or maybe something went right. I woke up the next morning in a regular rest area, my truck fine, my memory intact, but changed." "Changed how?" Zeb asked. "I can see them now," Eola said. "The overlaps. Not just when I'm in them, but all the time. I can see where the layers are thin, where the stations are trying to push through. And I can feel when drivers are in trouble, when someone's about to slip between worlds." She pulled out a map covered in markings. Red dots for confirmed overlap sites, blue dots for suspected locations, green lines showing safe routes through dangerous areas. "I've been tracking this for 2 decades, she said, building a map of the danger zones. But it's getting harder. The overlaps are spreading, appearing in places they never were before. We need more people who understand what's happening, people who can see the signs and warn others." Zeb studied the map. It was comprehensive, detailed, the work of someone who'd dedicated their life to understanding the phenomenon. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you have a choice to make," Eola said. "You can keep driving, keep avoiding the overlaps, hope you never slip through again, or you can help. Actively help, learn to recognize the signs, guide other drivers away from danger, maybe even figure out how to fight back." Zeb thought about his daughter, about his wife, about the normal life he'd built over 11 years of driving truck. Then he thought about Marcus Thorne and the younger driver who'd quit the profession entirely. He thought about the dark trucks running forever on roads between worlds, trying to save people they'd never meet. "I'll help," he said. "Tell me what you need." Over the next year, Zeb became more deeply involved in Pritchard's network. He learned to recognize the subtle signs of an approaching overlap, the way CB static would take on that rhythmic pulse, the slight shimmer in air temperature that preceded a phantom station's appearance, the feeling of being watched that meant the layers were getting thin. He started carrying specialized equipment, a backup GPS that showed historical routes and anomalies, a CB radio modified to pick up frequencies outside the normal range, a camera system that could capture what normal cameras missed. And he started to understand the scale of what they were dealing with. The phantom stations weren't random. They were part of a system, a network that existed parallel to the real highway system. And that network was growing, reaching out, trying to pull more of our reality into theirs. But the dark trucks were growing too, more drivers joining their ranks, more vehicles appearing to guide and protect. The battle between layers was intensifying, and humans caught in the middle had to choose sides. 2 years after his first encounter, Zeb was driving through the Panhandle again when he saw something new. A phantom station appearing at mile marker 247, the same place they'd felt that pulling force, but this time, the dark trucks were already there. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, surrounding the station in a tight perimeter, and they were pushing back. Zeb watched through binoculars as the dark trucks moved in coordinated patterns, their formation creating some kind of barrier around the phantom station. The green glow flickered and dimmed, the faceless figures moving erratically instead of with their usual synchronization. The station was weakening, being forced back to whatever layer it had come from. After 20 minutes, it collapsed entirely. One moment it was there, struggling against the dark truck's formation. The next moment it was gone, leaving nothing but empty highway and the dark trucks sitting in formation. Zeb grabbed his CB and switched to Channel 7. "This is Kincannon to Dark Convoy. I saw what you did. You're not just protecting anymore. You're winning." The response came immediately. That almost human voice he'd heard before. Not winning, holding, but more drivers are crossing over to help. Every year, more join us. Every year, we get stronger. Tell the living. Tell them we haven't given up. The dark trucks dispersed, vanishing into whatever dimension they inhabited when they weren't protecting drivers. But the message was clear. The battle could be won. Maybe not in Zeb's lifetime, maybe not for generations. But it could be won. Zeb continued his work with Pritchard's network, training new drivers to recognize the signs, building the database of safe routes and danger zones. He never encountered another phantom station directly, though he saw evidence of them regularly. Scorch marks on pavement at mile markers divisible by 13. Confused drivers reporting lost time and strange fuel consumption. The constant signs that the layers were still thin, still dangerous. But he also saw evidence of the dark truck's work. Drivers who should have been lost, somehow finding their way to safety. Phantom stations collapsing before they could claim victims. The slow, steady pushback against whatever was trying to merge the layers. 5 years after his first encounter, Zeb was training a new driver on overlap recognition when he got a call from Wallace Pritchard. The old man's voice was tired but satisfied. "We've mapped 90% of the danger zones now," Pritchard said. "Got protocols in place, warning systems, safe routes. Lost fewer drivers this year than any year in the past decade. We're making progress, Zeb. Real progress." "What changed?" Zeb asked. "Knowledge," Pritchard said simply. When drivers didn't know what they were dealing with, they were easy victims. Now they know. They recognize the signs, they avoid the danger zones, and when they do encounter overlaps, they know how to get through safely. Knowledge is power, even against something this strange. Zeb thought about that first November night. The terror and confusion, the desperate run through impossible territory. If they'd known then what he knew now, would it have been easier? Maybe. Or maybe the fear had been necessary, the catalyst that drove him to understand. "The dark trucks," Zeb said. "Do you think they know? That we're fighting back? That we're winning?" "I think they know," Pritchard said. "I think they've known all along. They were just waiting for us to figure it out ourselves." That night, Zeb sat in his truck at a rest area on Highway 287, watching the sun set over the Panhandle, mile marker 234, the place where his journey into strangeness had really begun. In the fading light, he thought he could see shadows moving in the distance. Dark shapes that might have been trucks, running their eternal routes on roads between worlds. He raised his CB handset and spoke into Channel 7. "This is Kincannon. To all the dark trucks out there running the night routes, thank you. We're not forgetting you. We're not giving up. And someday, maybe we'll figure out how to bring you home. No response came, but Zeb hadn't expected one. Some messages didn't need answers. Some thanks didn't require acknowledgement. He started his engine and pulled back onto Highway 287, heading south as darkness fell over the Panhandle. His GPS showed safe routes. His CB was tuned to the right frequencies, and he carried Iola Fenwick's map marked with every known danger zone. The highway stretched ahead into darkness, and somewhere out there the dark trucks were running their routes. Still protecting, still fighting, still hoping that someday the layers would separate and they could finally rest. Zeb didn't know if that day would come, but he knew he'd keep fighting for it. Keep warning other drivers, keep building the knowledge base that made survival possible. Because that's what drivers did. They helped each other. They shared information about road conditions and safe routes and places to avoid. Even when those places existed between dimensions. Even when the roads led to stations that shouldn't be there. Even when the very fabric of reality got thin and strange things bled through. The wheels rolled on through the November darkness, carrying their cargo toward morning. And behind them, invisible to ordinary sight but always present, the dark trucks kept their vigil. Patient and eternal, guardians of a boundary most people never knew existed. Highway 287 looked normal to passing cars. Just another stretch of Texas Panhandle Road, flat and empty and unremarkable. But Zeb knew better. He knew what ran beneath its surface, what waited at certain mile markers when the conditions were right. And he knew that knowledge was the only thing standing between ordinary drivers and the processing stations that wanted to pull them through into that other layer of reality. He drove through the night, alert and watchful, a guardian in his own right. Not trapped like the dark trucks, but chosen. Fighting the same battle, just from the other side of the layers. The CB crackled with static, and beneath it, Zeb heard that familiar, rhythmic pulse. But it was fainter now, weaker, pushed back by the growing strength of those who understood what they were fighting. Mile marker 258 passed in darkness. Empty shoulder, no phantom stations, no processing platforms, just normal pavement under normal stars. For now, at least, for tonight. And that would have to be enough. The rain hit Arliss Beaumont's windshield like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry god. He'd been watching the storm build for the last hour as he drove south on Interstate 35 through central Texas, dark clouds boiling up from the Gulf and turning the late afternoon into premature twilight. The weather radio had been squawking warnings about severe thunderstorms, possible tornadoes, and golf ball-sized hail for the last 50 miles. Smart drivers were pulling off at truck stops and rest areas, waiting it out. But Arliss was behind schedule and his dispatcher was already breathing down his neck about delivery windows. He was hauling electronics from Dallas to San Antonio, expensive cargo that meant he couldn't afford delays. The load was secure, the trailer was sealed, and his paperwork was perfect. Everything by the book, the way Arliss always ran. 14 years driving truck and he'd never missed a delivery window, never had a cargo claim, never had an accident beyond a few scraped fenders in tight loading docks. He took pride in that record. The storm caught him just north of Temple, hitting with a ferocity that made him immediately regret not pulling over earlier. Visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet, the rain so thick his wipers couldn't keep up even on their highest setting. Lightning struck close enough that he could smell ozone through his cab's air vents, and thunder rattled his windows hard enough that he worried about glass breaking. Arliss slowed to 40 miles per hour, then 30, then finally gave up and started looking for somewhere to pull off. The shoulder was too narrow and sloped, dangerous in conditions like this. He needed a proper parking area, somewhere flat where he could sit out the worst of the storm without risking his truck sliding into a ditch. A green sign appeared in his headlights, barely visible through the rain. Rest area 2 miles. He knew the spot, had stopped there before on previous runs. It was one of those older rest areas, built back in the 70s before they started making them fancy with visitor centers and vending machines. Just a big gravel lot with some picnic tables and a cinder block bathroom building. But it would do. The exit ramp was a river of water, his tires throwing up spray that obscured everything. Arliss took it slow, feeling his way down the ramp and onto the access road that led to the rest area. Through the rain, he could see a few vehicles already parked there, their shapes indistinct in the downpour. Good. He wasn't the only driver with enough sense to wait this out. He found a spot at the far end of the lot, away from the trees that lined the perimeter. No point in parking under branches that might come down in high winds. He backed his trailer into position, set his air brakes, and shut down the engine. The sound of rain hammering on metal was deafening, a constant roar that made it hard to think. Arliss settled back in his seat and pulled out his phone to call his dispatcher. No signal. He tried his CB radio instead, but all he got was static laced with interference from the lightning. Communication would have to wait until the storm passed. He poured coffee from his thermos and watched the rain sheet across his windshield. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind was picking up, rocking his trailer on its suspension, and the lightning was nearly continuous now. Each flash illuminated the rest area in stark white light, revealing other trucks and cars hunkered down against the weather. After about 20 minutes, Arliss heard something that made him pause with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. It was a sound coming from behind him, from his trailer. A metallic tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. He set down his coffee and listened. The sound continued, cutting through the roar of rain and thunder. It sounded like someone was inside his trailer, tapping on the walls. But that was impossible. The trailer had been sealed at the loading dock in Dallas, the bolt seal intact when he'd checked it during his pre-trip inspection. Nobody could be inside. Probably just cargo shifting, he told himself. The storm was rocking the trailer pretty good. Maybe some of the boxes had come loose from the cargo straps and were sliding around. But even as he thought it, he knew it didn't make sense. The tapping was too regular, too deliberate. Cargo didn't shift in patterns like that. Arliss grabbed his rain jacket and opened his door, immediately getting hit by wind-driven rain that soaked through his jeans. He climbed down from the cab and made his way back to the trailer, holding onto the side of the truck to keep from being blown over. The wind was incredible, gusting hard enough to make him stagger. He reached the back of the trailer and checked the seal. Still intact, the numbered tag exactly matching what was on his paperwork. He put his ear against the cold metal of the door and listened. The tapping had stopped. Maybe it had been his imagination after all, or maybe the cargo had settled and wasn't shifting anymore. He was about to head back to his cab when he heard it again. But this time it wasn't tapping. It was scratching. Long, drawn-out scrapes like fingernails on metal, coming from multiple points inside the trailer. The sound made his skin crawl, not because it was loud, but because it was so clearly deliberate. Something inside that trailer was making that noise on purpose. Arliss backed away from the doors, rain streaming down his face. His rational mind insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe animals had gotten into the trailer back at the loading dock, rats or possums looking for shelter. Maybe the electronics he was hauling had some kind of cooling fans that were making noise. Maybe the storm was creating some kind of acoustic effect that made normal sounds seem weird and directional. But none of those explanations felt right. The scratching continued. moving along the inside of the trailer walls, following a path from the doors toward the front where his cab was parked. Like something was walking the length of the trailer, dragging its hands along the metal as it moved. A flash of lightning lit up the rest area, and in that moment of stark illumination, Arliss saw someone standing next to one of the other trucks. A woman looking directly at him. She was drenched by the rain, her hair plastered to her head, but she wasn't moving, just standing there in the storm, watching him. Then the lightning faded and she was gone, swallowed by darkness and rain. Arliss blinked water out of his eyes and looked for her, but he couldn't see anything in the downpour. Had she even been real, or was the storm playing tricks on his vision? The scratching from his trailer grew louder, more insistent. Arliss hurried back to his cab and climbed inside, slamming the door against the wind. He locked it, then immediately felt foolish. Locked against what? Cargo doesn't need to use doors. He grabbed his logbook and checked the time. 5:47 p.m. He'd been parked here for maybe half an hour. The storm was still going strong, showing no signs of breaking. He needed to make a decision. Sit here and wait it out like he'd planned, or cut his losses and get back on the road despite the dangerous conditions. The scratching stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. Arliss sat in his driver's seat listening to rain and wind and his own breathing. The trailer behind him was quiet. No sounds coming from it at all. Maybe whatever had been making the noise had stopped. Maybe the cargo had settled. Maybe everything was fine. Then his CB radio crackled to life, not with static this time, but with a voice. A woman's voice, clear despite the interference from the storm. "Driver in the white Freightliner, you need to check your cargo. Something's not right in that trailer." Arliss grabbed his handset. "Who is this? How do you know what I'm hauling?" "I can see your truck from here," the voice responded. "And I can hear the sounds coming from your trailer. You're not the only one. My trailer's making noise too. So are at least 2 others in this lot. Something's wrong with all of us." Arliss looked out at the rest area, trying to spot which truck the voice was coming from. There were maybe 8 or 9 commercial vehicles parked in the lot, their shapes barely visible through the rain. "Where are you parked?" 2 rows over, Blue Kenworth. Name's Nedra Chilton. Been driving 15 years and I've never heard anything like this before. The noises could just be cargo shifting, Arliss said, but he didn't believe it any more than she probably did. "Does your cargo usually scratch at the walls?" Nedra asked. "Does it tap in patterns? Because mine's doing both, and it started right after we got hit by that first lightning strike." Arliss thought back. She was right. The tapping had started maybe 5 minutes after he'd parked, right around the time that lightning had struck close enough to make his hair stand up. Could there be a connection? Some kind of electrical effect from the storm? "What are you hauling?" he asked. "Auto parts," Nedra said. "All metal, nothing that should be making noise. What about you?" "Electronics. Computer equipment mostly, all sealed in boxes. So, nothing alive, nothing that could be moving around on its own." "Nothing," Arliss confirmed. "But I'm hearing it anyway, scratching, like something's trying to get out." There was a pause on the CB. Then Nedra's voice came back, quieter now. "Or trying to get our attention. Make us open the trailers." That thought sent a chill down Arliss's spine. Why would anything want us to open our trailers? "I don't know," Nedra said. "But I'm not opening mine until this storm clears and I can see what I'm dealing with. You shouldn't either. Whatever's making those sounds, it can wait until morning." Arliss agreed with her logic, but sitting here listening to mysterious noises all night didn't appeal to him either. "Maybe we should call the police, let them check it out." "And tell them what?" Nedra asked. that we're hearing sounds from our sealed trailers during a thunderstorm. They'll think we're crazy or wasting their time. Plus, look outside. No cop is responding to a call about weird noises in weather like this. We're on our own until the storm breaks." She was right, of course. Emergency services would be overwhelmed right now dealing with actual emergencies, not phantom sounds in truck trailers. Arliss and Nedra and whoever else was hearing these noises would have to wait it out. "Keep your doors locked," Nedra said over the CB. "Stay in your cab, and if you see anything unusual, call out on Channel 19. I think there's at least 4 or 5 of us here dealing with this." "Roger that," Arliss said. "Beaumont out." He set down the handset and stared at his trailer through the rain-streaked window between his cab and the cargo box. Nothing visible from here, just the front wall of the trailer and the slight movement as wind rocked it on its air suspension. But he could still hear it, faintly now. That scratching moving back and forth along the inside walls. His phone buzzed. He grabbed it, surprised to see he had signal now. A text message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt his stomach drop. "Don't open the trailer. Stay in your cab. It knows you're listening." Arliss stared at the message. How did someone get his number? Who had sent this? He tried to reply, but the message failed to send. No signal again, like the brief window had closed. Another flash of lightning, and in that moment he saw her again. The woman who'd been standing in the rain earlier. She was closer now, maybe 30 feet from his truck, still watching him. Still not moving despite the wind and rain that should have been knocking her around. This time, when the lightning faded, Arliss kept watching the spot where she'd been. His eyes had adjusted enough to the darkness that he could see her silhouette, still standing there. Watching his truck. Watching him. The scratching from his trailer changed pitch, becoming higher, more frantic. And now, there was another sound mixed in with it. A low humming, almost subsonic, that he felt more than heard. It made his teeth ache and his vision blur slightly at the edges. Arliss grabbed his CB again. "Chilton, you hearing a humming sound? Low frequency?" "Yeah," Nedra's voice came back immediately. "Started about 2 minutes ago. It's making me nauseous." "Same here. What is that?" "I don't know, but it's getting stronger." "And Beaumont? There's someone standing outside your truck. Woman in a dark jacket. She's been there for about 5 minutes now." Arliss felt ice water run down his spine. Nedra could see the woman too. So, she was real. Not a hallucination brought on by storm stress or carbon monoxide or any of the other rational explanations his mind had been grasping for. "Is she doing anything?" he asked into the CB. "Just standing there, watching." "But Beaumont, here's the thing. She's not getting wet. The rain's coming down in buckets, but it's like it's going around her. She's completely dry." Arliss looked more carefully at the woman's silhouette. Nedra was right. He could see rain falling all around her, but none of it seemed to be touching her. Her hair wasn't plastered down. Her clothes weren't clinging to her body. She was standing in the middle of a thunderstorm and staying perfectly dry. The humming grew louder, and now Arliss could see his coffee cup vibrating on the dashboard, the liquid inside creating ripples. The windows were buzzing in their frames, and he could feel the vibration through the steering wheel, through the seat, through the floor beneath his feet. "This isn't right," he said into the CB. "We need to get out of here." "In this storm?" Nedra asked. "We'll end up in a ditch or worse. We're safer, sitting still." But Arliss wasn't sure about that anymore. The humming was inside his head now, making it hard to think clearly. The scratching from his trailer had become frantic. Dozens of points of contact scraping against metal in patterns that almost seemed coordinated. Another vehicle's headlights came on, about 3 rows over from Arliss's position. The truck started moving, pulling out of its parking spot and heading for the exit. Arliss watched it navigate carefully through the flooded lot, windshield wipers fighting the rain. "Someone's leaving," he said into the CB. "I see it," Nidra confirmed. "Can't blame them. This whole situation is wrong." The departing truck reached the exit and turned onto the access road, its taillights disappearing into the rain. For a moment, Arliss considered following, making a run for it despite the storm. But before he could start his engine, something changed. The woman who'd been watching his truck suddenly moved. Not walking, but gliding, like she was on wheels or floating just above the ground. She moved toward the exit where the other truck had just left, her motion smooth and unnatural. Then she disappeared, not gradually, not obscured by rain or darkness. She simply vanished like she'd never been there at all. "Did you see that?" Nidra asked over the CB, her voice tight with fear. "I saw it," Arliss confirmed. "Where did she go?" Before Nedra could answer, another voice broke in on the CB. Male, older, with a Texas drawl. "This is Hoyt Bramble in the red Peterbilt. Anyone else seeing things that ain't quite right? Because I got a situation here that I can't explain." "What kind of situation?" Arliss asked. "I got out to check my trailer seals about 10 minutes ago," Hoyt said. "Took maybe 90 seconds. But when I got back to my cab and checked my clock, it showed I'd been gone for 17 minutes. That ain't possible, but there it is." Arliss looked at his own clock. 5:53 p.m. He'd parked here at 5:17, which meant he'd been here for 36 minutes. That seemed about right, though with the storm and the strange events, time had gotten a bit slippery in his mind. "Check your fuel receipts," Hoyt continued. "From your last fill-up, check the timestamp." Arliss dug out his receipt from the fuel stop in Waco, about 80 miles back. He'd filled up at 2:45 p.m. according to the timestamp on the receipt, but according to his dashboard clock, that was over 3 hours ago. The drive from Waco to this rest area should have taken maybe 90 minutes, not 3 hours. "My times don't match up either," Nedra said over the CB. "I'm showing time I can't account for. Like I lost an hour somewhere between filling up and parking here. So all three of us are missing time," Arliss said. "And we're all hearing sounds from our trailers. And there's a woman who can stand in the rain without getting wet. Anyone want to tell me what we've driven into?" Nobody answered. The CB crackled with static, and beneath it, Arliss could hear that low humming coming through the speaker. The same frequency that was vibrating through his truck, now being broadcast on the radio frequency. The scratching from his trailer had stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Arliss sat in his cab, rain hammering down, and tried to think through what was happening. Time distortions, impossible sounds from sealed trailers, figures that defied physics, all of it centered on this rest area during this storm. There had to be a rational explanation. There always was. Electromagnetic interference from the lightning could cause equipment malfunctions, timestamps to be wrong, radios to pick up strange signals. Stress and fatigue could cause drivers to misperceive things, see patterns that weren't really there. The sounds from the trailers could be thermal expansion of metal as temperature dropped with the storm, creating noises that only seemed deliberate. But even as Arliss ran through these explanations, part of him knew they weren't enough. This was something else, something that didn't fit into the comfortable boxes of rational explanation. His phone buzzed again. Another text from that unknown number. "The storm is a doorway. Some things use it to cross over. Stay in your cab. Don't let them make you open the trailer." Arliss tried to reply, demanding to know who was sending these messages, but again the text failed to send. He had signal for receiving but not for sending. Or maybe whoever was on the other end could reach him, but he couldn't reach them. The humming stopped. The sudden absence of that subsonic vibration left Arliss feeling disoriented, like his inner ear hadn't gotten the message that the sound was gone. He shook his head, trying to clear it, and looked out at the rest area. The rain was starting to let up slightly, the downpour easing into merely heavy rain instead of the apocalyptic deluge it had been. Through the lessening precipitation, Arliss could see the other trucks parked in the lot more clearly now. Maybe a dozen vehicles total, all of them dark and silent. Except one. 3 rows over, a truck's trailer doors were standing open. The cargo area was lit from within by a sickly yellow-green light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And in that light, Arliss could see movement. Shapes that didn't quite make sense. Forms that his eyes couldn't quite process. "Chilton," he said into his CB. "You seeing what I'm seeing? 3 rows over?" "I see it," Nedra's voice came back, strained. "That's the truck that left a few minutes ago. Or I thought it left. But it's back now, and those doors are open." "Did the driver open them?" Arliss asked. "I didn't see anyone get out. The doors just opened on their own." That wasn't possible. Trailer doors didn't open themselves. Someone had to release the latches, pull the pins, swing the heavy doors wide. But Arliss was looking at doors that were definitely open with no one visible near them. The pulsing light from inside the trailer was getting brighter, and the shapes moving in that light were becoming more distinct. They looked almost human, but the proportions were wrong. Arms that were too long, heads that sat at odd angles, movements that were too smooth and too jerky at the same time. "We need to leave," Nedra said over the CB, fear clear in her voice now. "Right now. Storm or no storm, we need to get out of this place." Arliss agreed with her completely. Whatever was happening here, whatever had used the storm as cover to manifest or cross over, or whatever the hell it was doing, they needed to be somewhere else when it finished. He reached for his ignition key. His hand froze halfway there. Standing directly in front of his truck, blocking his path, was the woman. She was closer than she'd ever been, close enough that Arliss could see her face clearly despite the darkness and rain. She had no expression at all, her features smooth and blank like a mannequin, and she was pointing at his trailer. Not just pointing, beckoning, telling him to go back there to open the doors to see what was inside. Arliss grabbed his CB. "She's back! Right in front of my truck. She wants me to open my trailer." "Don't do it." Hoyt's voice came back immediately. "Whatever you do, don't open those doors. That's what they want. That's what all of this has been about." "Who are they?" Arliss demanded. "What are they?" "Don't know and don't want to know," Hoyt said. "But I've been driving these roads for 30 years and I've heard stories. Things that show up during storms. Things that try to hitchhike in trailers. Things that want to get where we're going. If you open that trailer, you're letting them in. And once they're in, they're not getting out." The woman moved closer, her blank face now pressed against Arliss's windshield. She traced a pattern on the wet glass with one finger, a symbol that hurt to look at directly. And behind her, Arliss could see more figures emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them, all with the same blank faces, all moving with that same unnatural gliding motion. They were surrounding his truck, surrounding all the trucks. And the humming was starting again, stronger now, making the entire vehicle vibrate. Inside his trailer, the scratching resumed, but this time it was different. This time it sounded like it was coming from the outside of the trailer walls, not the inside, like something was trying to get in rather than trying to get out. Arliss made his decision. He fired up his engine, put the truck in gear, and hit the gas. The woman in front of his truck didn't move, didn't try to get out of the way. His bumper went right through her like she wasn't even there, passing through her form without resistance. In his rearview mirror, he saw her still standing in the same spot, her blank face turning to watch him drive away. The figures surrounding the other trucks didn't try to stop him. They just watched as he navigated through the flooded parking lot towards the exit. Behind him, that truck with the open doors was pulsing with light, and more figures were gathering around it, drawn to the opening like moths to a flame. Arliss hit the access road doing 30, tires throwing up spray. His CB crackled with Nedra's voice. "I'm right behind you. Hoyt's following, too. Anyone else who can move, get out now." The rest area receded behind them as they pulled onto I-35, heading south through rain that was already starting to lighten. Arliss's heart was pounding, his hands shaking on the wheel. Behind him, his trailer was silent now. No scratching, no humming, just the normal sound of cargo riding on air suspension. Whatever had been happening back there, they'd escaped it. For now. Arliss drove for 20 miles before his hands stopped shaking enough to trust himself on the highway. The rain had tapered off to a light drizzle, and the storm clouds were breaking up to reveal patches of dark sky. Other traffic was starting to appear on I-35, vehicles that had waited out the worst of the weather now getting back on the road. Everything looked normal, ordinary, like the last hour at that rest area had happened in a different reality. His CB crackled with Nedra's voice. "Beaumont, you still with us?" "I'm here," Arliss said, checking his mirrors to confirm the blue Kenworth was still behind him. "Hoyt?" "Right behind Chilton," the older driver confirmed. "We need to talk about what just happened back there. Pull off at the next truck stop and let's compare notes." Arliss saw a sign for a Flying J at the next exit, 5 miles ahead. "I'll meet you at the fuel islands. Give me a chance to check my trailer seals, make sure everything's still locked down." The truck stop was busy with drivers who'd sheltered from the storm, but Arliss found a spot at the diesel pumps and pulled in. Nedra parked next to him, and Hoyt pulled up on the other side. All 3 drivers climbed down from their cabs, looking shaken and exhausted despite only having driven a short distance. Nedra Chilton was a woman in her late 40s with gray streaks in her dark hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent years behind a wheel. Hoyt Bramble was older, probably in his 60s, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen a lot of highway. They gathered near Arliss's trailer, and he could see both of them were as rattled as he felt. "First things first," Hoyt said. "Let's check those seals. Make sure they're still intact." Arliss walked to the back of his trailer. The bolt seal was still there, the numbered tag matching his paperwork exactly. No sign of tampering, no indication the doors had been opened. He checked the latches and pins, all secure. Whatever had been happening inside that trailer, it hadn't involved physical entry. Nedra and Hoyt checked their own trailers and reported the same results. Seals intact, doors secure, no visible signs that anything was wrong. But all 3 of them had heard those sounds. All 3 had felt that humming. All 3 had seen things at that rest area that shouldn't have been possible. "We need to report this," Nedra said. "Call the highway patrol. Tell them about that rest area. Other drivers are going to stop there." "And tell them what?" Hoyt asked. "That we saw ghosts? That our trailers were making impossible sounds? They'll think we're crazy." "They'll think we're crazy until someone else experiences it," Arliss said. "But we should report it anyway, at least get it on record." He pulled out his phone and dialed the Texas Highway Patrol non-emergency number. After a few minutes of being transferred between departments, he got someone who took his report seriously enough to write it down. "We'll send a unit to check out the rest area," the dispatcher said. "But I have to tell you, we've had 3 other reports tonight about that location. Drivers seeing things, hearing sounds, experiencing equipment malfunctions. Whatever's going on there, you're not the first to notice it." Arliss thanked her and hung up. 3 other reports. We're not the only ones. "That storm," Hoyt said. "It wasn't natural. Or Maybe it was natural, but something used it as cover. I've heard stories about things that show up during severe weather. Things that exist in the electrical discharge, in the electromagnetic fields, in the spaces between lightning strikes. That sounds like science fiction, Nedra said. Maybe, Hoyt agreed. But I've been driving these roads for 30 years, and I've seen things that don't fit into normal boxes. Weather phenomena that shouldn't exist. Places where your GPS goes haywire. Stretches of highway where time doesn't work right. Most drivers just write it off as equipment failure or fatigue, but sometimes it's more than that. Arliss thought about the text messages he'd received, the warnings from an unknown number. He pulled out his phone and checked his message history. The texts were still there, but when he tried to reply again, the messages bounced back as undeliverable, like the number didn't exist or couldn't receive incoming texts. I got messages, he said, showing them his phone. Warnings about not opening the trailer, about the storm being a doorway. Anyone else get something like this? Nedra checked her phone and shook her head. Nothing. But my phone was acting weird all during the storm. Losing signal, gaining signal, timestamps jumping around. Mine too, Hoyt confirmed. Lost about 40 minutes somewhere between Waco and that rest area. My GPS tracking shows me on the highway the whole time, but I can't account for where those minutes went. They stood there in the fluorescent lighting of the truck stop, trying to make sense of impossible events. Around them, other drivers were fueling up, checking their rigs, going about normal business. Nobody else looked disturbed or frightened. Just 3 drivers who'd experienced something that probably dozens of other people had never noticed. We should check our cargo, Arliss said. Actually, open the trailers and verify everything's still there and undamaged. If something was happening inside those trailers, we need to know. Nedra looked uncertain. After what happened at the rest area? After those things were trying to make us open our trailers? You want to actually do it? We're at a well-lit truck stop with dozens of other people around, Arliss pointed out. If something's wrong with our cargo, we need to know before we make our deliveries. Better to find out here than at the receiving dock. Hoyt nodded agreement. He's right. Plus, I'm not going another mile without knowing what's in my trailer. Been driving all night wondering if I'm hauling auto parts or something else entirely. They broke the seals on their trailers one at a time, Arliss going first. He pulled the pins, released the latches, and swung open the heavy doors. Inside, his cargo was exactly what it should be. Pallets of boxed electronics all properly secured with cargo straps, load bars in place, everything by the book. He climbed up into the trailer and walked through it, checking behind the cargo stacks, looking for any sign of disturbance or damage, or anything that shouldn't be there. Nothing. Just cargo and empty trailer space, and the normal smell of cardboard and packing materials. He climbed down and gave Nedra and Hoyt a thumbs up. Everything looks normal. Your turn. Nedra's trailer held auto parts as she'd said, all properly packed and secured. Hoyt's was the same. Construction materials that matched his manifest exactly. 3 normal loads in 3 normal trailers. No sign of anything that could have made those sounds. No indication that anything unusual had happened. So what were we hearing? Nedra asked. If there's nothing in the trailers, where did those sounds come from? Maybe it wasn't about what was in the trailers, Hoyt said slowly. Maybe it was about what was trying to get in. Those things at the rest area, they wanted us to open the doors. Not to let something out, but to let them in. Arliss felt a chill despite the warm night air. You mean they wanted to hitchhike? Something like that, Hoyt said. I've heard stories from old-timers who drove in the 60s and 70s. Back then, before all the GPS tracking and satellite communications, drivers would sometimes pick up passengers they couldn't explain. People who'd be in the sleeper berth one minute and gone the next. figures that would show up in their mirrors but disappear when they looked directly. Most of them figured it was exhaustion or carbon monoxide, but a few swore they were hauling things that weren't quite human. "That's just urban legends," Nedra said. But she didn't sound convinced. "Maybe," Hoyt agreed, "but urban legends come from somewhere. And after what we just experienced, I'm less skeptical than I used to be." They sealed their trailers back up with new locks provided by the truck stop, documenting the seal numbers for their paperwork. Arliss felt better knowing his cargo was intact, but the mystery of the sounds remained unsolved. He'd heard them. They all had. Scratching, tapping, that low-frequency hum. If nothing in the trailers had made those sounds, then what had? They grabbed coffee at the truck stop restaurant and compared their routes. Nedra was heading to Houston, Hoyt to Austin, Arliss to San Antonio. All different destinations, but all of them on I-35 South. The same highway, at least for the next 100 miles. "I say we convoy," Hoyt suggested. "Stay together until we split off to our different destinations. Safety in numbers, and if anything else strange happens, at least we'll have witnesses." Arliss and Nedra agreed. They finished their coffee, topped off their fuel tanks, and got back on the highway just after 8 p.m. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind clear skies and a nearly full moon that lit up the landscape. Traffic was moderate, a steady stream of vehicles moving south. For the first 50 miles, everything was normal. Arliss kept his speed at 65, Nedra running parallel in the left lane, Hoyt bringing up the rear about a quarter-mile back. The CB was quiet except for occasional chatter from other drivers, traffic reports and weather updates, and the normal discourse of life on the road. Then, at mile marker 215, Arliss's dashboard clock did something impossible. He glanced at it and saw 8:47 p.m. He looked back at the road, checked his mirrors, looked at the clock again. Now it read 8:51 p.m. 4 minutes had passed in what felt like seconds. He grabbed his CB. "Chilton, Bramble, check your clocks. Tell me what time you're showing." 8:51, Nedra responded immediately. "Same here," Hoyt confirmed. "Why?" "My clock just jumped forward 4 minutes," Arliss said. "Like I lost time but didn't notice." There was silence on the CB for a moment. Then Nedra said, "My fuel gauge just dropped 1/8 of a tank. That's not right. I filled up completely at the truck stop." "Mine too," Hoyt added. "Lost about the same amount. And my odometer is showing 3 miles more than the last marker I passed." They were losing time and fuel, gaining miles that didn't exist on the highway. The same phenomena they'd experienced at the rest area, now happening while they were moving. Arliss felt his pulse quicken. Whatever had been at that rest area, it hadn't stayed there. It was following them. "We need to check our trailers," Arliss said. "Pull off at the next exit and check the seals." "Last time we pulled off, things got bad," Nedra pointed out. "Maybe we should keep moving, get to a populated area before we stop." But the decision was made for them. Ahead, in the darkness, Arliss could see lights. Not headlights from oncoming traffic, but stationary lights alongside the highway. As they got closer, he realized it was another rest area, and it looked exactly like the one they'd fled from an hour ago. Same layout, same buildings, same gravel parking lot. "That's impossible," Nedra said over the CB. "We're 100 miles from that rest area. How can it be here?" "It's not the same one," Hoyt said. "It's another one. Or maybe it's the same one following us. I don't know anymore." The rest area signs were lit up, directing traffic to take the exit. But Arliss had no intention of stopping there. He kept his speed steady, preparing to drive right past it. Nedra and Hoyt did the same, all 3 trucks maintaining formation as they approached the exit. Then Arliss's trailer started making that sound again. The scratching, The tapping, the low-frequency hum that made his teeth ache. And in his rearview mirror, he could see figures standing at the rest area entrance. Dozens of them, all with those blank faces, all watching his convoy pass. "They're there," he said into the CB. "The same things from before. They're at this rest area too." "I see them," Nedra confirmed. "How are they following us? How are they everywhere?" "They're not following us," Hoyt said, his voice grim. "We're following them, or we're still in their territory. Maybe we never left." Arliss didn't want to believe that, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Hoyt might be right. The time distortions, the fuel loss, the repeating rest areas. Maybe they hadn't escaped at all. Maybe they'd driven deeper into whatever phenomenon had manifested during the storm. Mile marker 220 passed, then 225. Each marker seemed to take longer to reach than it should, like distance was stretching. Arliss checked his GPS and saw something that made his blood run cold. According to the satellite view, he was on I-35. But the route line was flickering, jumping back and forth between two slightly different paths, like there were two versions of the highway occupying the same space. "GPS is glitching," he reported over the CB, "showing me in two places at once." "Mine's doing the same thing," Nedra said. "And I'm picking up a weird signal on my CB. Channel 7, listen to this." She switched frequencies and Arliss followed suit. On Channel 7, beneath the static, he could hear voices. Not the flat monotone from before, but actual human voices. Drivers calling for help, reporting their locations, asking for guidance. And all of them sounded terrified. "This is Beaumont southbound on I-35, Arliss transmitted on Channel 7. "To anyone receiving, what's your situation?" A voice came back immediately, a woman who sounded close to panic. "I can't get off the highway. Every exit I take leads back to I-35. I've been driving for 3 hours, and I keep passing the same landmarks. Please, someone help me figure out what's happening." Another voice, male and older. "My trailer doors opened while I was driving. I stopped to close them and saw things inside that shouldn't be there. Things that weren't there when I loaded. I'm too scared to stop again." More voices joined in, a chorus of confused and frightened drivers all experiencing similar phenomena. Time distortions, impossible sounds from trailers, exits that led nowhere, rest areas that appeared where they shouldn't be. And all of them were on I-35, all heading south, all caught in the same trap. "How many of us are there?" Nedra asked into the CB. "How many drivers are stuck in this?" Hoyt's voice came back heavy with realization. "All of us who stopped at that rest area during the storm. We're all caught in whatever this is. We drove into something and we can't drive out." Arliss wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be a way out. But the evidence was mounting that Hoyt was right. They were trapped in some kind of loop, some pocket of reality that overlapped with normal highway but didn't quite align with it. And the things with the blank faces were the residents, the natives, the things that lived in these spaces between. "There has to be a way out," Arliss said into the CB. "We just need to figure out what it is. Everyone, check your fuel gauges and odometers. Look for patterns." The CB filled with reports. Every driver was experiencing the same issues. Fuel draining faster than it should, odometers showing extra miles, clocks jumping forward in irregular intervals. But there was a pattern. The time jumps happened at mile markers that were multiples of 7. The fuel loss was proportional to how long they'd been in the loop. And the odometer discrepancies all added up to exactly 37 miles, no matter how far each driver thought they'd traveled. 37 miles, Nedra said. That's specific. That means something. Arliss pulled out his atlas and checked the map. From the rest area, where they'd first encountered the phenomenon, to San Antonio was exactly 37 miles. But they'd already driven past that point. They should be well south of San Antonio by now, but according to his GPS, they were still somewhere near Temple. "It's keeping us in a specific range," he said. "A bubble or a zone. 37 miles of highway that's been, what, displaced? Copied? Overlapped with something else? The storm did it," one of the voices on Channel 7 said. It was Hoyt. The electromagnetic discharge, the lightning, whatever energy was present during that storm, it created a boundary condition. Like a door opened between dimensions, and we drove through it. "So how do we close the door?" another driver asked. "How do we get back to normal reality?" Nobody had an answer. The CB fell silent except for static, and Arliss could hear that humming starting again. Coming from his trailer, coming through the radio, coming from the highway itself. The sound was building, growing stronger, and with it came that sense of wrongness, of reality bending in ways it shouldn't. Mile marker 230 appeared ahead. According to Arliss's earlier calculations, this should be the edge of the 37-mile zone. If there was going to be a way out, it would be here. He checked his mirrors and saw Nedra's Kenworth right beside him, Hoyt's Peterbilt still following behind. All three trucks running together, approaching the boundary. The humming grew louder. Arliss's vision began to blur at the edges, like looking through water. The highway ahead seemed to shimmer and split, showing two overlapping roads that didn't quite line up. One was the normal I-35, with proper lane markings and mile markers and the usual highway infrastructure. The other was darker, older looking, with markings that seemed wrong somehow. "You seeing this?" Nedra asked over the CB, her voice tight with stress. "I see it," Arliss confirmed. "Two roads. We need to pick the right one." But how could they tell which road was the correct one? The normal-looking highway could be a trap, bait to keep them in the loop. The darker road could be the way out, or it could lead somewhere worse. They had seconds to decide before the split became permanent. Then Arliss remembered the text messages, the warnings from the unknown number. He grabbed his phone and checked the message history. A new message had appeared, time-stamped impossibly in the future. "Follow the darker path. Reality is on the other side. Trust the wrongness." It went against every instinct he had. The dark road looked dangerous, threatening, like something from a nightmare. But the message had been right before. It had warned him not to open his trailer, to stay in his cab, to recognize the threat. Maybe it was right again. "I'm taking the dark road," Arliss said into the CB. "Following me is your choice, but I think that's the way out." He didn't wait for responses. He cranked his wheel to the right, feeling his trailer swing wide as he committed to the darker path. The transition was instantaneous and jarring. One moment he was on what looked like normal pavement. The next, he was driving on something that felt older, rougher, less solid somehow. Behind him, Nedra and Hoyt followed, and as they committed to the dark path, the normal-looking highway vanished. It simply ceased to exist, leaving only the darker road stretching ahead into midnight. The humming stopped. The scratching from the trailers stopped, and the oppressive sense of wrongness lifted, replaced by something that felt clean and cold and real. Arliss checked his GPS. It showed him on I-35, but now there was only one route line. No flickering, no dual paths, just a single highway. Mile marker 231 appeared ahead, then 232. The numbers were advancing normally now, one marker per mile, no strange jumps or distortions. "I think we're out," Nedra said over the CB, her voice shaking with relief. "I think we made it. Check your fuel gauges. Hoyt said. "Check your clocks." Arliss looked at his dashboard. The clock read 9:03 p.m., which seemed about right for the distance they'd covered. His fuel gauge showed he'd burned about what he should have for the miles driven. His odometer was tracking properly with the mile markers. Everything was normal. They'd escaped the loop, driven out of whatever pocket reality they'd been trapped in. The dark road had been the correct choice, but even as relief washed over him, Arliss couldn't shake the feeling that they'd gotten lucky. That most drivers probably chose the normal-looking highway, staying trapped in the loop forever. That somewhere in that overlapped space, there were dozens or hundreds of trucks still driving, still passing the same mile markers, still hearing sounds from their trailers as things tried to get in. "We need to warn people," he said into the CB. "Report this to DOT, to Highway Patrol, to whoever will listen. That stretch of highway is compromised. Other drivers need to know." They drove through the night, heading toward their separate destinations, staying in contact on Channel 19. And Arliss made call after call, reporting what they'd experienced, trying to get someone to take it seriously. Most dispatchers were polite but skeptical. A few promised to send units to investigate. One told him that they'd received similar reports but had found nothing unusual at the locations described. How could they find something that only existed in certain conditions, during certain weather patterns, in spaces between normal reality? The phenomenon wasn't always there. It appeared and disappeared, trapped drivers and released them, followed its own logic that had nothing to do with highway engineering or meteorology. Arliss delivered his load in San Antonio just after midnight, on time despite the delays and detours. He called his dispatcher to report the successful delivery, and after some hesitation, he told her about the rest area incident. She listened without interrupting, then was quiet for a long moment. "You're not the first driver to report something like this," she finally said. "We've had 3 others this month alone, all on I-35, all during storms. Management doesn't want to make a big deal out of it because it sounds crazy. But between you and me, start avoiding that highway when weather looks bad. Take alternate routes. The company would rather have you late than have you vanish into whatever's going on out there." Arliss promised he would. He parked at a truck stop for his mandatory rest period, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those blank faces pressed against his windshield, heard that scratching from his trailer, felt that humming in his bones, and he kept thinking about the message on his phone. Trust the wrongness. Who had sent that? How had they known what was happening? Were there others out there who understood this phenomenon, who'd mapped it, who could see the boundaries between reality and whatever lay beyond? He needed to find out, because one thing was certain: he'd be driving I-35 again. He couldn't avoid it forever. And next time, he needed to be prepared. Needed to know what signs to watch for, what choices to make, how to navigate through spaces that shouldn't exist. The humming might have stopped for now, but Arliss had a feeling it was far from over. Arliss woke at 6 a.m. to his phone buzzing with a call from an unknown number. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. The voice on the other end was female, middle-aged, speaking with the precise diction of someone who'd spent years on dispatch radios. "Mr. Beaumont, my name is Eola Fenwick. I'm a night dispatcher for Crossland Freight out of Oklahoma City. I understand you had an incident on I-35 last night. The kind of incident that doesn't make it into official reports." Arliss sat up in his sleeper berth, immediately alert. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've been tracking these incidents for 7 years," Iola said. "And because I was the one sending you those text messages. We need to talk, Mr. Beaumont. Somewhere private. Somewhere we can compare information without being overheard. Are you still in San Antonio? Yeah, Arliss said carefully, at a truck stop off I-10. There's a diner called Martha's about 3 miles from your location. Meet me there in an hour, come alone, and bring any documentation you have from last night. Fuel receipts, GPS logs, anything that shows the time and fuel discrepancies. She hung up before Arliss could ask more questions. He sat there holding his phone, debating whether this was a good idea. Meeting a stranger who somehow had his phone number and had been monitoring his movements. But she'd sent those warnings. She'd known what was happening before he did. That meant she had information he needed. He cleaned up, grabbed his paperwork, and drove his personal truck to the diner. Martha's was one of those old-style highway restaurants that had been serving truckers since the 50s, with a gravel parking lot and a neon sign that flickered in the early morning light. Only a few vehicles were parked outside this early. Inside, Iola Fenwick was waiting in a corner booth. She was in her early 50s with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like they'd seen a lot of highway miles. Her eyes were sharp and assessing as Arliss slid into the booth across from her. "You escaped," she said, without preamble. "That's good. Most drivers don't, at least not on their first encounter. The fact that you chose the darker path shows good instinct." "How did you know to warn me?" Arliss asked. "How did you even know I was there?" Iola pulled out a laptop and opened it to show a map covered in colored markers. Red dots, blue lines, yellow zones, all overlaid on highway routes across Texas. "I monitor weather patterns, driver reports, GPS anomalies, anything that might indicate a manifestation. When that storm formed yesterday, I knew it had the right characteristics. Severe electrical activity, rapid pressure changes, specific wind patterns. The conditions were perfect for a boundary event." "A what?" "That's what I call them," Iola said. "Boundary events. Places where reality gets thin, where the normal rules stop applying. They usually form during extreme weather, in areas where there's already some kind of geographical anomaly. Underground water, magnetic deposits, intersection of ley lines if you believe in that sort of thing. The storm provides the energy. The location provides the anchor point, and something opens up. A door, a window, a crack in reality. Pick your metaphor." Arliss spread his paperwork on the table. Fuel receipts showing impossible consumption rates, GPS logs showing positions that jumped around, timestamps that didn't align with his dashboard clock. "So, what happened to us? We drove into one of these boundary events? More accurately, you drove into the space it created," Iola said, examining his documents. "These events don't just open doors, they create pockets, bubbles of altered space that overlay normal geography. You're still on I-35, but you're also somewhere else, somewhere that looks like I-35 but operates on different rules." "The 37-mile loop," Arliss said. "Why that specific distance?" "I don't know," Iola admitted. "Every boundary event has different characteristics, different sizes, different rules, different dangers. Some are just a few hundred yards. The one you encountered was 37 miles. I've documented one in Oklahoma that's over 90 miles. They're not consistent." She pulled up a database on her laptop showing dozens of incident reports. Dates, locations, driver testimonies, all cross-referenced with weather data and geographical information. It was comprehensive, professional, the work of someone who'd dedicated years to understanding this phenomenon. "How many drivers have been caught in these things?" Arliss asked. "Hundreds, probably," Iola said. "Most don't report it because they don't want to sound crazy. Some report it and get dismissed as fatigued or hallucinating. A few, like you, escape and want answers. Those are the ones I try to find and warn before they encounter another event." So, this happens regularly? These boundary events are common? More common than anyone wants to admit, Iola said. I've documented 47 events in Texas alone over the past 7 years. Probably more that I haven't found. They form during severe weather, last anywhere from a few hours to a few days, then collapse. Most drivers who get caught either find their way out eventually or... She trailed off. Or what? Arliss pressed. Or they don't come out, Iola said quietly. Their trucks are found abandoned, no sign of the driver. Or they're never found at all. Just vanish from GPS tracking, stop responding to dispatch, cease to exist. Officially, they're listed as missing persons. Unofficially, they're trapped in boundary events that never collapsed. Or they went so deep into the altered space that they couldn't find their way back. Arliss thought about the voices he'd heard on Channel 7. All those drivers calling for help, reporting that they couldn't get off the highway, describing the same phenomena. How many were trapped in the event last night? Based on traffic patterns and storm data, probably 8 to 12 commercial vehicles, Iola said. You, Chilton, and Bramble got out. I'm still tracking the others. Some might have found their own way out. Some might still be in there. But the event collapsed, right? The storm passed. We got out when we chose the dark road. Iola's expression darkened. That's what concerns me. You got out, but I'm still getting GPS anomalies from that section of I-35. Trucks that appear on satellite tracking for a few minutes, then vanish. Radio transmissions on odd frequencies. The boundary event should have collapsed by now, but something's keeping it open. She showed him her laptop screen. The map of I-35 showed a highlighted section between Temple and San Antonio, marked in red. Small blue dots appeared and disappeared within that zone, each one representing a vehicle that GPS had briefly detected before losing signal. Those are trucks, she said. Still in there. Still driving the loop. And every hour that passes makes it less likely they'll find their way out. Arliss felt sick. We have to help them. Send in emergency services, close that section of highway, something. I've tried, Iola said. Highway Patrol investigated and found nothing unusual. The road looks normal to anyone who isn't caught in the event. You could drive through that section right now in broad daylight and never notice anything wrong. The boundary only reveals itself under specific conditions. Then what conditions? Arliss demanded. How do we trigger it so we can rescue those drivers? That's the problem. I don't know exactly. Weather is part of it, but not all of it. There's something else, some trigger I haven't identified yet. The drivers who get caught seem to be the ones who stopped at specific locations during the storm. Rest areas, certain exit ramps, particular mile markers. But I can't predict which locations will become anchor points for a boundary event. Arliss remembered the rest area, the figures with blank faces, the way reality had seemed to bend and twist around that location. The things we saw, the figures, what are they? Inhabitants, Iola said. Or maybe manifestations of the boundary space itself. I don't know if they're conscious entities or just phenomena that look like entities, but they're consistent across different events. Humanoid forms, blank faces, trying to get into trailers, trying to make drivers open their cargo. Always the same pattern. Why trailers specifically? What do they want with our cargo? I don't think they want the cargo, Iola said. I think they want the space. Trailers are enclosed, sealed, separated from the cab. They're like little pockets of isolated reality. Maybe that's what these entities need to move from one place to another. A container they can hide in, hitchhike in, use to cross back into normal reality. The thought made Arliss's skin crawl. So if we'd opened our trailers back at that rest area, You would have let them in, Iola confirmed, and they would have been there when you reached your destination, in San Antonio, or Houston, or wherever you were delivering, stepping out into normal reality, carrying whatever wrongness they brought with them from the boundary space. Jesus, Arliss muttered. So, every time a driver gets caught in one of these events and opens their trailer, they could be releasing something? Maybe, Iola said. Or maybe nothing happens and they just find their normal cargo. I don't have enough data. Most drivers who report these events don't open their trailers, either because they're smart enough not to, or because they escape before it becomes an issue. The ones who do open their trailers usually don't report what they find, if anything. A waitress came by with coffee, and they ordered breakfast, falling into silence while she was nearby. When she left, Arliss leaned forward and lowered his voice. "What do you want from me? Why bring me here to tell me all this?" "Because you survived," Iola said, "and because you made good decisions under pressure. You didn't open your trailer. You recognized the warning signs. You chose the correct path when the highway split. Those aren't common traits, Mr. Beaumont. Most drivers panic, or freeze, or make the wrong choice. You did everything right. So, what? You want to recruit me? Make me part of your research project." "I want you to be prepared," Iola said, "because you'll encounter another boundary event. Maybe not tomorrow or next week, but eventually. These things have a way of finding drivers who've been through them before. Like you've been marked, flagged by the system, put on a list of people who know about the boundaries. That's paranoid thinking," Arliss said. "Is it?" Iola pulled up another database on her laptop. "I've been tracking drivers who've had boundary encounters. 63 individuals over 7 years. 41 of them had multiple encounters. 22 had 3 or more. The recurrence rate is 87%. Once you've been in a boundary event, you're statistically likely to encounter another one." The numbers were stark and disturbing. Arliss thought about his schedule, all the runs he had planned for the next month. How many of them would take him through areas where boundary events could form? "How do I avoid them?" he asked. "You can't completely," Iola said, "but you can minimize risk. Avoid driving during severe weather when possible. Monitor weather patterns and route around high-risk areas. Stay away from rest stops during electrical storms. And most importantly, if you start experiencing the warning signs, time jumps, fuel anomalies, strange sounds from your trailer, get off the highway immediately and wait it out in a populated area." Their breakfast arrived, and they ate in silence for a few minutes. Arliss was processing everything Iola had told him, trying to reconcile it with his understanding of how reality worked. Part of him still wanted to believe there were rational explanations for everything he'd experienced. Equipment malfunctions, weather effects, fatigue-induced hallucinations. But the evidence was too consistent, too well documented. Iola had been tracking this for 7 years. She had databases full of incidents, patterns that repeated across different events, testimonies from dozens of drivers who'd experienced similar phenomena. This wasn't mass hysteria or coincidence. This was real. "The text messages you sent," Arliss said. "How did you know to send them exactly when I needed them?" "I didn't," Iola admitted. "I send warnings to every driver whose GPS shows them entering a high-risk zone during potential boundary conditions. Most of them never experience anything unusual and probably think I'm crazy. But for the ones who do encounter events, having that warning makes the difference between survival and not. You do this for free, just out of the goodness of your heart." Iola's expression hardened. "I do it because I lost someone. My husband, Tom. He was a driver, 23 years on the road, disappeared on I-35 8 years ago during a storm. Just vanished, truck and all. Never found, no explanation. officially listed as a missing person. But I know what happened to him. He drove into a boundary event and couldn't find his way out. I'm sorry, Arliss said, and meant it. That's why I started tracking these things, Iola continued, trying to understand what happened, trying to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else. I can't save everyone, but I can warn people. I can give them information that might keep them alive. They finished their breakfast, and Yella handed Arliss a card with her contact information. Keep this. If you experience anything unusual on the road, anything that doesn't feel right, call me immediately. I maintain a network of drivers who've been through boundary events. We share information, warn each other about high-risk areas, help coordinate rescue efforts when drivers get trapped. Like Nedra Chilton and Hoyt Bramble? Arliss asked. Already contacted them both, Iola confirmed. They're part of the network now, same as you. We look out for each other because nobody else will. Arliss pocketed the card. What about the drivers still trapped in last night's event? Is there anything we can do? I'm working on it, Iola said. I have contacts at Highway Patrol, some retired officers who believe these events are real. They're going to try another investigation, maybe with specialized equipment that can detect the electromagnetic anomalies associated with boundary spaces, but it's a long shot. Keep me posted, Arliss said. If there's a way to help, I want to be part of it. They left the diner and stood in the parking lot as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill. Normal traffic moved past on the highway, regular people going to regular jobs, completely unaware of the invisible dangers that lurked in certain weather conditions on certain stretches of road. One more thing, Iola said before they parted ways. The darker path you chose when the highway split. That was the right decision, but it won't always be. These events aren't consistent. Next time you might need to choose the lighter path, or the middle path, or some other option I haven't documented yet. Trust your instincts. Listen to what feels wrong, because wrong is often a signal that you're perceiving something others can't see. Trust the wrongness, Arliss repeated, remembering the text message. Exactly, Iola said. Reality has rules. When those rules break down, the wrongness is your best guide to finding your way back. She got into her car and drove away, leaving Arliss standing in the gravel parking lot with more questions than answers. He headed back to the truck stop and spent the rest of the day going through his logs, documenting everything that had happened the previous night. He called Nedra and Hoyt, confirming they'd also been contacted by Iola, comparing their experiences and looking for patterns. That night, Arliss had a new run scheduled. Houston to Dallas, the reverse of yesterday's route. Back up I-35 through the zone where the boundary event had manifested. His dispatcher had given him the option to refuse, to take an alternate route via I-10 and I-45 that added 2 hours to the trip. But Arliss needed to face this, needed to drive that highway again, and prove to himself that he could handle it. He left Houston at 8 p.m., running solo this time. Nedra and Hoyt were on different schedules, headed to different destinations. But they stayed in contact via CB, checking in every 30 minutes, sharing their positions and status updates. The network Iola had mentioned, supporting each other even when they were hundreds of miles apart. The weather was clear, no storms forecast for the next 48 hours. According to Iola's data, boundary events were unlikely to form in stable atmospheric conditions. But Arliss kept his guard up anyway, monitoring his gauges, checking his clocks, listening for any unusual sounds from his trailer. Mile marker 200 passed, then 210. He was approaching the zone now, the 37 miles where the boundary event had manifested. His phone showed he still had Iola's number, and he'd programmed it into speed dial just in case. His GPS was set to record his full route, documenting every mile for future reference. At mile marker 215, the place where his clock had first jumped, Arliss slowed down and paid careful attention to his instruments. Everything looked normal. Clock advancing 1 second at a time, fuel gauge dropping at the expected rate. Odometer tracking perfectly with mile markers. No anomalies, no warning signs, nothing to suggest reality was anything other than completely normal. He passed through the entire 37-mile zone without incident, reaching mile marker 252 with a sense of relief mixed with anticlimax. Whatever had been there last night was gone now, either collapsed or dormant, or waiting for the next set of conditions that would trigger its manifestation. But as he approached Temple, where the original rest area had been, Arliss saw something that made him slow down. There were lights at the rest area. Not the sick yellow-green glow from before, but normal lights. And there were vehicles parked there, their shapes illuminated by security lamps. He almost kept driving. But something made him take the exit, pulling into the rest area that had been the starting point of last night's nightmare. In daylight it had been ordinary. Now, at night, he needed to see if it was still ordinary, or if something had changed. The rest area looked completely normal. A few trucks parked in their designated spots, a couple of cars near the restroom building, everything exactly as it should be. Arliss parked at the far end and sat in his cab, watching and listening. No scratching from his trailer, no humming, no figures with blank faces standing in the shadows. Just a quiet rest area on a clear night with normal people taking normal breaks from their normal drives. He climbed down from his cab and walked to the back of his trailer, checking the seal. Still intact, same number he'd put on in San Antonio. He put his hand against the metal of the trailer wall and felt nothing unusual. Just cold steel, normal vibrations from highway traffic. The familiar presence of cargo secured behind locked doors. A figure emerged from the restroom building and walked toward the parking area. For a moment, Arliss tensed, remembering those blank-faced entities from the Boundary event. But as the person got closer, he saw it was just a middle-aged woman in a company jacket, a legitimate driver taking a legitimate break. She noticed him and nodded in greeting. "Evening. Weather's nice tonight." "Yeah," Arliss agreed, relaxing slightly. "Real different from last night." "That storm was something else," she said. "I pulled off here to wait it out. Weird thing, though. I could have sworn I was only parked for about 30 minutes, but when I checked my clock afterward, I'd lost almost 2 hours. Must have dozed off without realizing it." Arliss felt his pulse quicken. "You were here last night, during the storm?" "Sure was. Why? Did you experience anything unusual? Strange sounds, time distortions, GPS glitches?" The woman gave him an odd look. "No more than you'd expect in a thunderstorm. Why? Did something happen?" Arliss studied her face, looking for any sign that she was hiding something or had experienced the Boundary event but was afraid to admit it. But she just looked confused by his questions, like she genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. "Nothing," Arliss said. "Just curious. Drive safe." He walked back to his truck, processing this new information. The woman had been at the rest area during the storm and had lost time, but she hadn't experienced the Boundary event itself, or at least she wasn't aware of it if she had. Maybe the event had only captured certain drivers, the ones who met some specific criteria. Or maybe she'd been on the periphery, affected by time distortions but not pulled fully into the altered space. Viola would want to know about this. Arliss pulled out his phone and sent her a text with the details. She responded within minutes. "Common pattern. Peripheral exposure. Driver experiences minor anomalies but no full boundary encounter. Suggests the event had a core zone and outer layers with decreasing intensity. Good data." Arliss climbed back into his cab and continued north, leaving the rest area behind. He had a delivery to make in Dallas by morning, and despite everything that had happened, he was still a professional driver with a job to do. The boundary events were real and dangerous, but they weren't constant. Most of the time, the highways were just highways. Most of the time, reality worked the way it was supposed to. But now, Arliss knew the truth. Knew that under the right conditions, in the right places, reality could bend and break and create spaces where the normal rules didn't apply. Knew that there were things that lived in those spaces, or used them, or were created by them. Knew that some drivers never made it back from their encounters with these phenomena. And he knew he'd been lucky. Lucky to have received Iola's warnings. Lucky to have made the right decisions. Lucky to have escaped when dozens of others hadn't. The rest of the drive was uneventful. Arliss delivered his load on time, filed his paperwork, and took his mandatory rest period. But before he slept, he pulled up Iola's database on his phone, the one she'd given him access to after their meeting. He spent an hour reading through incident reports looking for patterns, trying to understand the logic behind these boundary events. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. The events were increasing in frequency. 7 years ago, when Iola started tracking them, she documented maybe 5 or 6 per year across all of Texas. Last year there had been 47. This year was on track to exceed 60. Something was changing. The boundaries between realities were getting thinner, the events were lasting longer, and more drivers were getting caught in them. Iola's database included projections based on the trend data, and they weren't encouraging. If the pattern continued, within 5 years boundary events might become common enough that every driver would encounter one eventually. Arliss closed the database and lay back in his sleeper berth, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Tom Fenwick, Iola's husband, who disappeared into a boundary event 8 years ago. Thought about all the other drivers who were listed as missing, who'd vanished from GPS tracking, whose trucks were found abandoned with no sign of what had happened. Were they still out there somewhere? Still driving through altered spaces, trapped in loops, unable to find their way back to normal reality? Or had they found exits that led to places even worse than the boundary events themselves? These were questions Arliss didn't want to contemplate. But he knew he'd have to eventually. Because Iola was right. He'd encountered a boundary event once, which meant he'd encounter others. The highway had marked him somehow, flagged him as someone who knew about the boundaries and could navigate them. And that meant the next time he drove through a storm, the next time weather conditions aligned just right, he might find himself pulled back into that altered space. Back into the 37-mile loop, or into a different boundary event with different rules and different dangers. All he could do was stay prepared, monitor weather patterns, watch for warning signs, trust his instincts, and hope that when the next event manifested around him, he'd be smart enough and lucky enough to find his way back out again. The humming might have stopped for now, but somewhere on I-35, in that 37-mile zone, other drivers were still trapped, still driving the loop, still hearing sounds from their trailers as things tried to get in, and Arliss had a feeling it was only a matter of time before he joined them again. 2 months passed without incident. Arliss ran his regular routes, avoided driving in severe weather, and stayed in constant contact with Iola's network. He heard from Nedra weekly, comparing notes and sharing information about routes they'd driven. Hoyt checked in less frequently but always responded when Arliss reached out. They'd become a loose community of drivers who understood what most people couldn't see. Then, in early January, Arliss got a call from Iola at 3 a.m. Her voice was urgent, stripped of its usual measured calm. "I've got 6 drivers trapped in a boundary event on I-35. Same zone as your incident, but this time it's different. The event isn't collapsing. It's been active for 18 hours and it's getting stronger. I need your help. Arliss was in Oklahoma City, 300 miles from the event location. What can I do from here? I need someone who's been through a boundary event to guide the trapped drivers out, Iola said. I can track them on GPS, I can see where they are, but I can't tell them which path to take when the highway splits. You've done it, you know what to look for. Can you talk them through it? Yeah, Arliss said, already pulling on his clothes. Send me their CB frequencies. For the next 6 hours, Arliss sat in his truck at a rest area in Oklahoma, coordinating with 6 terrified drivers who were caught in a loop they couldn't escape. He walked them through the warning signs, helped them identify the moment when the highway would split, and guided them toward the darker path that had saved him 2 months earlier. 5 of the drivers made it out. They followed his instructions, chose the right path, and broke free of the boundary event. But the 6th driver, a woman named Patricia Moreland, panicked when the highway split. She chose the lighter path, the one that looked safer and more familiar. Arliss listened on the CB as her voice grew more distant, more confused, describing scenery that didn't match any highway he knew. Then static and silence, and no matter how many times he called her truck number, she didn't respond. She's gone, Iola said when Arliss finally gave up trying to reach her. GPS shows her signal disappeared completely. No trace, no position, nothing. She went somewhere the satellites can't see. Where? Arliss demanded, though he already knew Iola didn't have an answer. I don't know. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere worse than the boundary events we can track. I'm sorry, Arliss, you did everything right. She just made the wrong choice. Arliss sat in his truck and stared at the CB radio, thinking about Patricia Moreland driving through spaces that didn't exist, trapped in a reality that had nothing to do with I-35 or Texas or any place that appeared on maps. He wondered if she'd keep driving forever, or if eventually her fuel would run out and she'd be stranded in whatever impossible landscape she'd chosen. The experience shook him. Helping 5 drivers escape felt like a victory, but losing Patricia felt like a failure. He couldn't shake the feeling that if he'd said something different, explained the choice better, been more persuasive, she might have made it out. You can't save everyone, Iola told him when they debriefed later that week. I learned that the hard way with Tom. Sometimes people make choices we can't control. Sometimes the boundaries take what they want, and there's nothing we can do about it. But Arliss kept trying anyway. Over the next year, he helped guide 17 more drivers out of boundary events. He became Iola's go-to resource for coordinating escapes, the voice on the CB that drivers learned to trust when reality stopped making sense. Nedra and Hoyt joined the effort too, creating a small team of guides who understood the boundaries better than anyone else. They saved most of the drivers they tried to help, but not all. 3 more vanished like Patricia, choosing wrong paths or waiting too long to make their escapes. Each loss weighed on Arliss, another name added to the list of people who'd been swallowed by spaces between realities. The boundary events kept increasing in frequency, just as Iola's data had predicted. By the end of the year, Arliss had personally experienced 4 more events, each one different from the last. Different sizes, different rules, different manifestations of whatever intelligence or force created these pockets of altered reality. He learned to navigate them by feel, by instinct, by trusting the wrongness that indicated where normal reality lay. He learned which sounds from his trailer meant danger and which were just harmless manifestations of the boundary space. He learned to read GPS glitches like a map, interpreting the patterns of signal loss and distortion to find the edges of events. But he never learned why these events formed, what purpose they served, what intelligence, if any, guided them. Iola had theories, but no proof. The entities with blank faces appeared in every boundary event, always trying to get into trailers, always beckoning drivers toward rest areas that pulsed with sick light. But whether they were conscious beings or just phenomena shaped like beings remained a mystery. On a cold February night, almost 15 months after his first encounter, Arliss was driving through Oklahoma when he heard a CB transmission on Channel 7 that made him pull over immediately. The voice was male, older, weathered by years of highway driving. "This is Tom Fenwick calling for Iola Fenwick. If anyone can hear this, please tell my wife I found a way out. Tell her the boundaries aren't permanent. Tell her I'm coming home." Arliss grabbed his handset with shaking hands. "Tom Fenwick, this is Arliss Beaumont. I know your wife. Where are you?" Static, then the voice came back fainter. "I don't know where I am. Somewhere in the spaces. Been driving for what feels like years. But I found a path, a route that leads back. Tell Iola I'm on my way. Tell her." The transmission cut off. Arliss tried to respond but got only static. He immediately called Iola, told her what he'd heard. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long he thought the call had dropped. "That's impossible," Iola finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tom disappeared 8 years ago. Even if he was still alive somewhere in a boundary space, even if he found a way back, the time differentials, he'd be decades older. It can't be him. It was him," Arliss insisted. "The voice, the way he spoke, he knew your name. He said he was coming home. Time doesn't work the same in the boundary spaces," Iola said quietly. "Maybe for him it's only been months instead of years. Maybe the reverse. Maybe he's been trapped for decades from his perspective. I don't know. But Arliss, if there's even a chance, I'll watch for him," Arliss promised. "I'll put out the word to the network. If Tom Fenwick shows up anywhere, we'll know." But weeks passed with no further transmissions. No truck matching Tom's description appeared on any highway. No GPS signals that could be traced to his vehicle. Just that one transmission. That one moment of contact across whatever boundaries separated normal reality from the spaces where lost drivers roamed. Iola never stopped watching for him. She monitored every frequency, tracked every GPS anomaly, investigated every report of strange CB transmissions. But Tom Fenwick remained lost, somewhere in the spaces between, either unable to complete his journey home or trapped in a loop that made him think he was making progress when he wasn't. Arliss continued driving, continued guiding trapped drivers out of boundary events, continued documenting the phenomena for Iola's ever-growing database. He accepted that this was part of his life now, part of what it meant to be a professional driver in a world where reality had thin spots, and storms could open doors to impossible places. Some nights, when he was driving through dark highways under storm clouds, he'd hear those sounds from his trailer. The scratching, the tapping, the low hum that vibrated through steel and bone. And he'd remember that first night at the rest area. The figures with blank faces, the choice between light and dark roads. He never opened his trailer during those moments. Never pulled over at rest areas that felt wrong. Never chose the path that looked safer when highways split. He'd learned to trust the wrongness, to follow the instincts that kept him on the side of reality, where maps made sense and mile markers advanced in order. But he knew that somewhere out there, on highways that didn't appear on any GPS, other drivers were still trapped, still running their loops, still hearing sounds from their trailers as things tried to get in. Patricia Moreland, Tom Fenwick, and hundreds of others who'd made wrong choices or been caught by events they couldn't escape. And every time Arliss saved a driver from a boundary event, every time he guided someone back to normal reality, he thought about the ones who were still out there, still driving, still hoping to find their way home. The humming never really stopped. It just got quieter. waiting in the spaces between mile markers, between reality and whatever lay beyond, waiting for the next storm, the next set of conditions that would thin the boundaries and create new pockets where the normal rules didn't apply. Arliss learned to live with it, to drive through it, to help others survive it, because that's what drivers did. They kept moving forward, no matter what the road threw at them, even when the road itself became something that shouldn't exist. On a warm spring morning, Arliss was fueling up in San Antonio when his phone buzzed with a message from Iola. Just 3 words. Tom came home. Arliss called her immediately. "What happened? Where was he?" "He showed up at our house last night," Iola said. And he could hear the tears in her voice. "Just drove up in his truck, like he'd been gone a week instead of 8 years. He looks older, Arliss, maybe 15 years older than he should, but he's alive, he's here, he made it back. How? He doesn't remember clearly. Says the boundaries kept shifting. Time kept jumping, but he held on to the idea of home. Held on to it so hard that eventually a path opened up and led him here. He wanted me to thank you. Said he heard your voice on the CB helping other drivers, and it reminded him that escape was possible. That home was still out there waiting." Arliss felt something tight in his chest loosen. "I'm glad he made it back. Tell him welcome home." They talked for a few more minutes, Iola promising to send Tom's full account once he was ready to discuss it in detail. When they hung up, Arliss stood in the truck stop parking lot and looked at the highway stretching away in both directions. Normal pavement, normal traffic, normal reality. But underneath it, invisible to most drivers, were the boundaries. The thin spaces. The pockets where reality bent and broke and created roads that led to places they shouldn't. Tom Fenwick had been trapped in those spaces for 8 years and found his way home, which meant others could too. It meant Patricia Moreland might still be out there, still driving, still searching for the path that would lead her back. It meant every driver the boundaries had swallowed wasn't necessarily lost forever. They were just driving routes that took longer to navigate, running on highways that didn't follow normal geography. And maybe, with enough time and enough luck and enough determination to hold on to the idea of home, they'd eventually find their way back. Arliss climbed into his truck and pulled onto I-35, heading south toward his next delivery. The same highway where he'd first encountered the boundary events, where he'd learned that reality had layers and storms could open doorways to impossible places. But the day was clear, the weather stable, and his gauges all read normal. The trailer behind him was silent except for the usual sounds of cargo riding on good suspension. No scratching, no humming, no warnings of boundaries getting thin. Just the open highway stretching ahead, taking him where he needed to go.